There you go. Okay.
We're already live. I wasn't muted.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Hear us, but now they can. We're live.
All right. Awesome. All right. So we are PEA and Polk County Public Schools are back for our fourth, I think it is, negotiation for May 2nd, 2022. Well, he's just watching the live stream.
Oh, okay. I thought he was.
Sorry. So we are scheduled for 3 to 7 today, and then we will also be meeting again Thursday, May 4th, from 3 to 7 as well. And so where we're going to start with is a recap, since our last meeting was March 31st. In the month of April, we have met in some subcommittees for job descriptions and finance, and we're working through salaries. So that is still in the works. We are hoping to have, again, that to you before we leave for summer break. That's still the goal. And so we'll still continue to work in those subcommittees and then be bringing, once we have consensus, be bringing joint recommendations to the big bargaining tables. And so right now what we have is March 31st, we had tentatively agreed to sick leave transfer language, and we needed a signed TA for the para and ESP contracts. So that's what we're going to start with now. And that's just adding in the sick leave transfer language, employee to employee, that was agreed to March 31st with the teacher contract. Go ahead.
And can I recap as well?
Yes, go ahead.
Just as confirmation, you probably already saw the work session information for org charts loaded up.
Yes.
In the very end of that were the PDFs for the 4 ESP JDs, where we had the registrar, we had finance, we had principal, and we had school secretary. And we also had the JDs for the SLOs, all the speech and language.
Yeah.
You know, there were 3 in there for the various levels.
Yes.
So those are going through, but it also brought me around to wanting to make sure we're communicating on the rest of the work that the subcommittees were working on. Is that yet to be brought forward later on or to the main group? Or?
So I think the way maybe it's going to work best is when we have all of the financial pieces to bargaining, which the job descriptions, some of them are changing pay grades, because in those job descriptions, we need to make sure that they have the updated pay grade changes for some of them that are changing or new pay
than
grades.
Those that we already had.
Yes.
Right.
And so we'll need to make sure that before they're voted on by the school board with those changes, that they can't be voted on until we have the upgraded pay grades.
Well, and if you looked at the JDs, they didn't have anything in them.
Yes.
They just had the description. So
yes.
we kind of left
So just before they actually get officially voted on, we'll need to make sure that if there's new pay grades, which the registrar and the financial secretary will have to be assigned a pay grade.
Okay.
And then there have been some change recommendations to other like the speech, sign language, center school paras. Those will all have to be brought. But I think it might be better, again, if we do that all as like a financial package and just we do it all at once.
And when you establish those levels, we'll also at that time have a review of what's moving forward from subcommittee.
Yes. Yep. Yes. I think that's probably going to be the easiest, so that it's just, there's going to be probably one bargaining session where we have all the joint recommendations that impact salaries and wages come all together. And so, Laura, can you hand back those so Wilfredo can sign them, and then we'll pass them to Brian and Jason?
I'm checking ESP, but that's ESP and 2 pair. Yeah. Going around as well.
All right. So we will be right now we're signing the sick leave transfer language into the para and ESP contracts while we do the recap. And so what I had when I was going through everything, and so Laura, I guess, check to make sure we're on the same page. What I had on the union side for that's still outstanding, that's on the table, we have teacher Article 6. And we have Appendix E, which I had some questions about Appendix E because I saw in your proposal with Article 22, the back and forth, some of that might have been resolved in your counter with Article 22. And so we can have a discussion about that. We both have Article 22 for teacher, which is compensation, which honestly, probably the Article 22 compensation for the teacher, and then the para and ESP compensation articles will probably have to be brought when we talk about the financial package, because that's going to have to have some language in there too. So we won't be signing off on 22 today or on the para and ESP compensation articles, because that'll have to be done all at once with the money stuff once that's all brought to us. On the district outstanding that's still on the table is we have Article 4, some of the language that you brought with the updating the non-discrimination clause, which we were good with, but then there's also the discussion of the attendance language. And so we wanted to have a discussion about that today. So really on the district side, I only have teacher Article 4 and teacher Article 22 that's still on the table. And then for us, like I had said, teacher Article 6, Article 22, and Appendix E. And then all 3 contracts, we had presented the grievance procedure. And we still had one article that we haven't officially put across the table, but Brian, I believe we are having some discussions with that tomorrow. And then we can talk about how we move that forward potentially Thursday.
You said 6.
Yes, teacher Article 6. So is that what you also have, Laura?
I think so. There may be 1 or 2 more. The school calendar, we still need to propose 3, teacher 3,
Okay.
get the Friday dismissal days in. Some other things.
So we have an MOU for that. That's good. Do we want to see how they work and then extend the MOU and then change maybe the contract if those work maybe next year?
MOU expires when it gets in the contract, I believe is reworded. So.
But I guess what I was saying, because the MOU that we signed to extend those 3 extra staff development early release days is through June of 2023. And so do we want to maybe not change the contract now? And then we can see how those go. And then we can address that maybe in the spring when we come back. Because we can, even though next year's not an open book, we could still update some articles if we jointly agree.
Okay with that, Brian?
Because we do have an MOU
Just
in
working under
place.
the MOU for the 10 early dismissal days rather than changing the contract, which has 7 now. You don't think that'd be confusing to folks?
I think it's okay. I mean, we do that with MOUs. I mean, I wouldn't say frequently, but we
I know it
do.
was a priority to embed established. At the end of the day. It was a priority for us.
Okay.
We'll just kind of table that one.
Okay.
We know we can use the MOU as a
Yeah.
vehicle if we need to.
Yeah. I mean, we did that with Article 15 when we had updates before we came back. And so we had changes to Article 15 from TIAC
I guess my
a year or
thing
2
is
ago.
with the MOU that puts us out enough or so before we actually get through bargaining again. So
Well, we can talk about that too tomorrow briefly and see what we want to do, because we have Thursday to come back as well. Okay, was Article 3 the only other one? Or did you guys have anything for support staff that we were looking for is coming up?
We'll need to get the non-discrimination statement in ESP and parent.
Yes, okay, I did not catch that.
That was on my to-do list. And then reasonable suspicion we still need to talk about, but I don't know that we're prepared today for the reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me add this to my notes too. So non-discrimination
Reasonable suspicion of.
and the board rights.
Yeah, the reasonable suspicion drug testing and prescription that you had proposed on the 29th. We were still waiting on a legal review on that.
Okay. And would you like, Laura, would you like me to do the non-discrimination clause in the parent ESP one?
Let me do it because you did the lead.
Okay.
I don't know that it'll be ready by Thursday, but I will.
Well, I can do it real quick. I mean, it's not a big, I don't care.
Offer twice, I said.
Yes, thank you. Okay, all right. I can do that real quick. All right, so I'll take care of that and have that ready for Thursday. Okay. Okay,
And then plus what we have today, which we have.
okay. All right. You pass that over
The TAs, yes, right there.
Was that just the para?
No,
You
I
sent
got
back?
I have 4 here.
Okay, perfect.
So make sure you sign 4.
So Brian and Jason.
Whatever.
So do we want to start with what's, I think if you guys agree, can we talk about Article 22 when we talk about the financial package when it comes? Is that okay? That's but outstanding on both sides for teacher 22.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, we had talked about working on some of that language from the last meeting.
Okay.
We'll have to do that.
Okay, perfect. So I guess right now what we have on the district side, we can start with Article 4, which that in the teacher contract. You guys are good with that? So I have for you what I printed from last time.
This is,
So I wrote out what's up, what we have voted on the other side.
Okay.
Okay. So on from the district's proposal from the 31st of March, on Article 4 for the teacher, we were good with the non-discrimination clause being updated. And we were good with adding policy advisory letters that are not a form of discipline. We had a point to make. Do we just want to call them policy advisory letters moving forward? Because I don't know if we've actually called anything letters of concern for a while. I think for the most part, they've been just called policy advisory letters.
No, they still use a letter
Okay.
of concern as well. The policy advisory letter is just a little bit more robust. It actually informs the employee of the policy that he or she may potentially have violated. Because oftentimes what we find is that during progressive discipline, they don't know, they're not familiar with the policy. And so that's the purpose for the policy advisory.
Well, since they're more robust, do we just want to have policy advisory letters and just kind of drop off?
What's the difference between the two? Tony?
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm late to the party.
Well, they're really, most normally, the policy with the letter of concern, the policy is never really talked about, and essentially the principal or the administrator just issue the letter, say, hey, I have concern about this. They really won't go into great detail of what it is that they have concern about, or if there is a potential policy violation. And so we introduce a policy
Can you
advisory.
get the first letter without a policy violation?
Well, neither is a
They're both-
form of discipline.
Neither is a form of
Right.
discipline.
Yeah.
Just step one, right?
Yeah.
no.
No, it's not even, it's just like a preliminary.
They're no
It's really not even a preliminary. It's just saying, hey, this is our policy.
Yeah, or hey, you may want to kind of be careful about this, that, and the other, because it could potentially be a violation of Polk County Schools.
A letter of
Correct.
concern.
Step one is still a verbal, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
So this is, it's essentially a summary of, but follow me for a second. If I meet with, Stephanie's my principal, and she meets with me because I'm not fulfilling some of it. And we have this conversation. Is there not a subsequent email or letter that goes to you, please, saying, per our conversation on such and such,
That's-
reminding you of the following?
That's like the policy advisory
It's a
letter.
letter of expectation.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we were wondering, and we're going to talk with you guys about it, instead of having two, can we just call them policy advisory letters and drop the letter of concern? Since it seems like the policy advisories have been a little bit more robust anyway.
I don't particularly have an issue with that, but I mean.
I don't have an issue, but I would ask us collectively to think about situations that wouldn't actually be in policy. For example, I've dealt with situations with principals where they may have a parent that's acting outside of the scope of their job description, and we have to kind of remind them, hey,
Mhm.
this is a letter of concern that you should be doing this, or
Mhm.
you kind of lost your cool in this meeting. This is a letter of concern. You need to be professional in meeting with parents. This is different than you need to be timely. There's a policy, or this is the material you're allowed to use in class. There's a policy for review, that kind of stuff. So I just want to put that out there that I'm concerned that the widget of policy advisory letter would fit everything that
Okay.
Tony and I see, perhaps. That's
Okay.
the only thing.
We were just kind of curious to try to consolidate and instead of having two,
No, I
to make it
agree.
more clear and have just one.
And to me, the important part is that we just maintain the common knowledge that it's not discipline.
There's an applicable use for both.
Okay.
Does that clear up for you, Mr. Hyde, how it's used?
Yeah, the question, I think what Stephanie's really getting at is there not one generic title that could be applicable to all scenarios?
And I
Yeah.
think that's where the policy advisory letter kind of come in, right? So that because I think your policies, your district policies really do cover a litany of things in broad strokes. So
And it could even be a handbook, right? As long as, like school handbooks can't be contrary to the contract or policy.
because, for example, one of the issues as someone that represents Kevin is sort of was the employee aware of the policy, right? So that whether they're acting out in a meeting or their time in attendance or and you name it, it kind of really encourages the principal, I don't know who writes it, but say the principal to look up the policy. This is a policy, it's just an advisory policy. You put on notice that this exists. And then you could, of course, have a conversation.
So could we discuss if we're trying to go to one term, like advisory letter or even like policy / advisory letter?
I was just going to say advisory letter,
We used to call it memorandum of instruction. Memorandum of instruction.
MOI.
Because it allows you to capture either a policy issue or a behavioral issue without having to feel like you have to categorize them.
Yeah.
So behavioral issues aren't always policy issues. Being collegial towards a colleague.
Yeah.
Could ultimately become a grievance or a procedural issue, but from its inception, just a difference of opinion. Two adults have to learn how to get along.
Yeah.
So memorandum of instruction was a simple way for us to title any document or memo that went to an employee to remove expectations.
Mhm.
And if it's policy driven, you link the policy.
Policy.
But if it's just a general expectation for professionalism, we were able to address it in that regard as well.
We just wanted to simplify it instead of having two.
Yeah.
Have one. And we were okay with one or the other, but I know we've used policy advisories more frequently. And so whatever we decide, we wanted it more simplified.
Listen, we're collaborative. It's semantics.
Yeah.
If you figure out, if we can figure out the word we like or the words
Mhm.
we like, MOI,
Or do we just want to call it an advisory letter?
Call it advice.
yeah.
It's fine with me.
Yeah.
Because then if there's a policy,
Memorandum of expectation.
yeah, I'm okay with either. We wanted, instead of having two, to maybe simplify it to where there's just one.
To change the title, respectfully, we should just add a sentence defining what that typically captures. So we would say issues related to professionalism and or those directly associated with
Policies.
with policy.
And it's not discipline.
Yeah, and it's not a form of discipline.
So
I like memorandum of expectation. Because I think,
I do too, because it's a good
It
first
has
step.
expectation right in the title.
yep.
done.
This is an
If
expectation.
we get to step one,
That's expectation.
you didn't meet the expectation.
We don't write it in memo form, so like letter,
Letter of expectation.
rather than like a letter.
I'm fine with that. Letter of expectation.
As I said,
Yeah.
I'm more concerned about the function.
Yeah, the function. And when we were talking, instead of having two things, we really just wanted one title of what it's called, whatever that was going to be.
And I think this is a good discussion because
Yeah.
it will help.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to call it a letter of expectation, kind of combine the two. So letters of expectation are not a form of discipline and may address
Behavior and
may
policy.
address
Instructional policy or interpersonal issues.
may address
Those are the big three.
policy.
I would be a little bit more, I would encourage us to be a little bit more generic potentially and just
Yeah.
issues related to professionalism.
May address issues related to professional.
Because that allows you to address tardiness, legality.
Or policy.
or policy.
Okay. So that was in page 3 of 6 from y'all's. And so letters of expectation are not a form of discipline and may address issues related to professionalism or policy, period.
I like it.
Okay, I can type that up. in a second. And then we do need to add in and I talked to Laura, we had talked before we went live, the TA language from 310, 4.5-8. So I can take your proposal and add that in, what was already tentatively agreed to.
Did I send that to you last?
Yes, I have it. And then on page 5 of 6 was the last piece, and it was at added number 6, attendance expectation. We want to reject this right now, and I'll tell you why. I think that moving this solely to the onus of the employee, while we're trying to fix some of the root problems of attendance and tardiness, is a little premature. We know that attendance stems from right now problems with student discipline, burnout with some of the bureaucratic red tape that teachers are expected to do. And people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses. And so we know that there's some issues maybe managerially that we're working out. And so we would really like to work on you with this, because we do, as a team and as a union, people need to be at work, right? But on the flip side of that, people also accrue and earn paid time off, whether it's, in the form of personal days or 12-month folks getting vacation, or, if they're sick and they've got to take sick days, right? For whatever, within the parameters of the contract. And we feel like this burdens the entire system when, if there are patterns of abuse, that those should be addressed with the people that are possibly or potentially abusing that, in conjunction as we're trying to fix some of the root problems of this, attendance issues. And so we do not want to put something in that's could be regarded as punitive or trying to get people to not use their paid leave when we are really not addressing the actual issues. And so I know that Mr. Hyde and I have talked about attendance a lot this year. And so we would want to work on that with you and look at the patterns and look to see what some of the root causes are. Because I know we're looking at history of school sites that have heavy turnover. Maybe some of those schools that do have a higher absentee rate. What's really going on in those schools? And so we are not unwilling to work with you on this, but we are not wanting to put something like this in our contract just yet.
Brian, are attendance expectations addressed anywhere else in the contract?
Yes, sir. And
Nowhere?
I don't believe they are. I mean, they're outlined relative to how we take leave and how they earn their leave
We've
days.
addressed employee chronic absenteeism.
And that's the issue we've been working on for multiple years.
Where is that in the
actually?
contract?
Actually, there is language that says that, isn't there language on thing that it's, well, I don't have the contract.
I'll pull it up.
But I believe there's language that says if an employee abuses sick leave, you have the ability to
Well,
request
It's a doctor's note,
doctor's note.
but it's not discipline.
You have,
Before we discipline, we have to have,
Yeah, after discipline's on file for absenteeism, then the superintendent.
But
requests
I think what we're
you do have the right to address discipline.
But I think what we're getting at here is that for individuals that may be abusing their time, right? Or taking sick leave when they're really not sick, and we're seeing patterns of that emerge. Instead of holistically having blanket policies that affect all employees, I think we have we do have mechanisms in our contract and through progressive discipline to address those. And they're not being utilized to the extent that they could be utilized for folks that truly are abusing paid leaves, right? We don't really see too many write-ups for that or advisory letters or anything of that sort come to us anyway through members.
and let me jump in because I know from our perspective, I'm not aware that we've ever been in the way of someone using leave that they have on the books that is due them.
Mhm.
That's an earned right.
Yeah.
I think where Tony and I and Barry have been is we touch those folks that are out of their leave and they're continuing to bank those days that they're without pay.
Mhm.
And we're hearing from principals that I'm losing,
Yeah.
momentum because they've earned it and burned it.
Mhm.
Plus they're taking more time now without pay.
Yeah.
So I
But that's
feel-
not an option though.
I feel compelled that
Well,
we
it's not.
continue with that priority.
Yeah.
It's not an option, but it continues to happen. And I'll tell you, Stephanie, the reason why you
Mhm.
don't see or you don't hear on your end is because the members aren't making a big deal about it. They take these disciplines and they go on down the road. No less than every day, we get 4 to 5 to 6 letters regarding absenteeism, where the employee is not on an approved leave of absence. He or she they're just out.
Mhm.
They've earned their time, they burn their time, and they're just out. And just because you're sick doesn't mean that you can be out without an approved leave of absence. And so that comes back to leave management and especially when you have employees that are long tenured, 10, 15, 20 years, and he or she doesn't have a single day of sick leave on the books. And it continues to be that way. And it's chronic offenders. I wouldn't say it's a small percentage, but it is a small percentage of the people that we deal with on a fairly frequent basis relative to, and it's about leave management.
Well, and I think you actually just helped me prove my point, Tony, is that it is a small group of people that are truly abusing it. And if they're being written up, like you said, and they're just continuing to do it, then we have options for those folks. They can go through progressive discipline. And then in the contract that does trigger, if they have discipline for abusing leave, then they can be asked for sick notes and stuff like that. And so I think we need to utilize the mechanisms we already have in place to handle that small percentage of folks that are truly abusing, instead of blanketly putting this out there for all employees who really, I think far and wide, most of our employees are not abusing their time. And then I think with working with some of the root problems as to why maybe at some schools we see higher rates of absenteeism than others, we need to get to the root of the problem instead of just blanketly putting all the onus on the employee. I think there's a lot of things we can do in conjunction, but you're right. Leave management is a huge issue. And if principals or supervisors, because it's not just school-based principals, if principals or supervisors are not doing their due diligence and continuing that progressive discipline for that small group of folks that are truly abusing it, because the contract works both ways. You have management rights, principals have rights under our contract, and teachers have rights. Teachers have the right to take their earned leave, but they do not have the right to take leave if they don't have leave on the books. Unpaid leave is not a thing unless you're under FMLA or one of the approved unpaid leaves in our contract.
But to that end, is personal without pay still an option available on the leave form?
I know we talked about that last time, that on the back end, on the administrative side, that has to come off as an option, because paid time or unpaid time without leave should not be an option on those forms, because it's not an option. And so that's why we want to reject this for right now. But knowing that we're not unwilling to work with you, because people do need to be at work.
Here would be my response, Stephanie. So this whole section, you could try to make the same argument that should teachers all be told that they have to teach efficiently and faithfully in the classroom? We do. We feel the need to have to reiterate that. Do all teachers need to understand that they have to use prescribed instructional materials and methods of instruction? There hasn't been a week that's gone by where this issue has not presented itself to me, so I can tell you absolutely this is a need, especially now when materials are being scrutinized more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
So the only thing I would ask is if you object to the current state of the language or the current manner in which it's presented, I would be okay with that if we amended it. But I do think there needs to be a reference in here that says employees need to follow policies and procedures as it relates to calling in or duly notifying their school that they're going to be absent and or tardy. So it could be something overly simplistic as that. I'm fine with that, because let's be honest, there's 6 sentences or 7 sentences here, not a single other bulleted line above it has a similar description.
Yeah.
So while I don't think it comes across as punitive or negative, I think it's very lengthy it's very explicit. But I would ask that we agree to amend the language to shorten it, to remind them of the actual expectation, because we do in everything else above.
Okay.
And so if it's our fundamental belief,
So what's your idea for a simple sentence then?
I think it say something to the effect that employees need to follow. I mean, I'm going to turn to the team. Is there a bulleted item in
If I
here?
can jump-
What was in here previous? I know this is
This is new language.
This is new.
Yeah.
So I
could
like,
we- Go ahead.
I like the first sentence where it says regular and prompt attendance, because regular gets, you need to be at work every day. You need to be, consistent, and prompt deals with the punctuality of being tardy or late. So I kind of think the first sentence kind of captures the
Yeah, I was going to say
priorities.
the first two.
Yeah.
So if you went with employees are absent from duty unless you be on an approved leave, leave it at that. Those two first sentences suffice, and we're able to already address absenteeism, chronic absenteeism, and patterns of absenteeism. And
And I think something was discussed previously on this. Y'all need to look at the employee leave form.
Yeah.
Yeah, we already talked about that.
now the only
Removing
thing
that.
The only thing I need to talk with you guys about separately before we finalize this piece, meaning my team, is leave without pay and just completely striking it from the form. I need to know historically, have we left it on there because the fear is that we'd rather have somebody here for 150 days than to have a vacancy for 180? I mean, what's the truth behind why that was left on the form, or was it just missed? If it was just missed, that's fine. We can say that and move on. We're all new.
The form changed at some point to have that amended onto it that didn't come through the table. And we questioned it several times, to be honest with you, of how that, it gives people a false expectation that they don't have
That's an
the
option.
time on the books, but they're going to take a cruise and take the, I said to somebody I know recently, well, how are you doing that? Because I happen to know they didn't have any sick leave or personal leave. And they said, well, I'm just going to take it without pay. And I said, well, really, that's not a thing, but it's on the form.
We should charge them because it costs me a sub every day.
Looking at the form, it does have some asterisks. It says if claiming personal leave without pay, provide details of emergency necessitating the absence.
Well, cruise ain't it.
Right.
You can do that.
May I just say, I have had this conversation with at least two principals, one who is no longer has retired, about she had somebody who did this every year. And I said, that's just disciplinary if you choose to. Oh, that's so much paperwork. So I said very politely, because we were friendly, I said, then don't complain to me about it. Because you have a recourse.
That's valid.
And so that was the discussion on our side when we digested this, is that there are mechanisms within the contract that we feel just aren't utilized to the extent that they could be to correct some of this.
Elsewhere is the rest of it gets to a really detailed explanation.
Yeah.
That if we take the position from time to time that employees are not necessarily aware of the contract and or the expectation, how do we capture that for the employee? So that somebody doesn't turn around and say, well, I didn't know, and it's not written anywhere, so how would I know that? I don't want to give somebody ammunition for that argument either.
Mhm.
You could write something like absent without the possibility of pay. Because you have to have something.
Well, listen, if you guys take, I was surprised that you guys take opposition to unpaid leave on the form. If that's an issue for you all, we'd be happy to strike it.
Well, because at the end of the day, the reason we take issue with it is because it's really not an option. And so, and I think like Marianne had said, it gives people this false sense that is an option, and it's really not.
And I don't disagree with you, because I think at some points it forces a principal to say, well, it's on there. Somebody somewhere must have said this is an issue. They approved it,
Mhm.
and I'm gonna be honest, our principals and administrators are human beings too. They want to take care of their employees. And so if that becomes the flexibility they can afford an employee, I can see them wanting to do that. But we need to clarify that this summer with them, Brian, during the trainings.
Exactly. And another reason I would like to review this as well is in the the fact of practice. You don't get to choose personal leave without pay when you have
When
leave
you have
on the
time on the
books.
books, yeah.
You can submit leave without pay, but if you've got the leave on the books, we're going to come to you and say, you've got to burn this first, because what we have seen historically is
You don't get to save it for
They'll wanna
terminal
go-
payout.
they'll want to go to the hunt camp or whatever for a little period of time and say, I want to take it without pay. I'm going to go ahead and bank this because I'm going to cash out at a certain
Yeah.
period of time. So,
Well, the misnomer here, when you say you're gonna take leave without pay, it costs me more money.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm still paying for a sub, or we're losing services because somebody else is having to backfill for that position. So I'm in agreement. I mean,
Mhm.
Would this, not knowing the historical perspective behind this, would this have been something that would have been used prior to us having bereavement leave? Let's just say, for instance, someone
Possibly.
was out of leave.
That was a mechanism.
And that was a
in place.
mechanism for them to continue to be
That-
off, to
very
grieve
possible.
their loved one and things of that nature.
well, it was probably a combination of multiple things.
Or just emergency situations.
Yeah, because it does say, please provide details of emergency necessitating the absence. So if someone they legitimately had an absence, okay, listen, we'll allow you to take 3 days of personal leave, but that's it. After that,
Yeah.
you subject yourself to disciplinary action, but we're going to give you these 3 free days.
If we remove it from the form, to your point, Tony, I would ask that we add something at the bottom that says that unpaid leave will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, and it's not reviewed by the building principal, it's reviewed by HR.
But you can do that. Tony, come here, sit next to me. No, just kidding. But if you left the language in there, right? Because it sounds to me like the issue isn't, I'm an employee, I fill out the form, I'm assuming I hit submit. Someone else in God knows where reviews it and approves it. So whoever's reviewing and approving it clearly doesn't seem to be reading that asterisk, right? Because if it shows up as going on a cruise, that should be an immediate denial.
But let's just, so long as everybody's being truthful.
Yeah. I mean,
Went on a cruise. For all we know, they're saying, well, I got a cousin in hospice and I need to go be with them. Now we got to be a little careful there. But so I'd be open to review. Here's what I don't want to have happen. Remove the flexibility that we currently have.
Mhm.
So that somebody then takes the incredible strong position to say, well, it's not on the form, so it's not allowed. You guys shouldn't be allowing it. I have been in public education far too long that I wish everything were black and white. But it's a little bit of white, it's a little bit of black, and a whole lot of gray. And to give us flexibility as employers to be considerate of our employee group, I think is important. So I'd like to see us somehow capture that in the form.
Well, and I like what you said, having something at the bottom. I think the
I do
issue,
think it should be a function of HR.
yes, and I think that right now people can just check the box
Or the region.
and they think that it's an option, but we don't want to give up flexibility like that either in emergency situations.
Absolutely.
And so, but if at the form and on the administrative side, because you guys have control and own the form, if on the administrative side, you have something at the bottom that unpaid leave,
Would it make sense to reclassify as emergency unpaid leave?
emergency unpaid leave would be reviewed by
There you
Human
go.
Resource
I like
Services.
that.
Expectation
I
that
like
this is
that.
not for routine things, this is.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Because I had it happen earlier this year. Somebody got offended because they wanted to go run in Hawaii on a triathlon and we weren't approving their leave. And it came to me and I said, I'm not approving
No.
for this either.
So emergency unpaid leave it may be reviewed by HR on a case-by-case basis.
Or I'd be happy if you said the principal has signed it first and the regional, then it goes to HR.
However, but that's your operations, not us. But yes, I agree because there are emergency situations. But right now, the way it is, it appears people have the false sense of situation that they can just check it and it's fine.
Okay.
So
If you guys would be comfortable with the first 2 sentences there, so at least we're addressing something. We don't even have to put attendance expectation. Just start with the sentence. We'd want to capture something there, just a reasonable expectation of employees. But you don't have to have the whole comprehensive
You don't have
narrative.
to send this right away, right? The caucus line, the second sentence, I would have to just kind of, I want to talk some more about that.
well, do you have a question for them?
No, they answered it.
Okay.
They clearly need to evolve their policy on type of
Mhm.
attendance. So, but I'd rather have a conversation briefly with our team.
Okay.
Because honestly, I just want to understand what
Do you want to, so if we want to have just a quick, so do we want to maybe save that and maybe talk about Article 6 and then have a few things if both sides need to caucus so that we're not coming back and forth? Is that good? Okay. Okay, so I think that was it for 4. Okay. So with 6, I actually think looking at my notes, well, let's just talk about 6. Okay, so 6. Okay, so last time you guys, so going to, oh, I don't have page numbers. I'm so sorry. 6.3 planning time. It's on page 5. If I remember the last session, you guys we had some discussion about Part C, the addition, about the 1 hour versus the 1.5 hours for a block. But we right now because we wanted to add that language in to reflect the MOU that's out right now that teachers can get compensated for covering on their planning period. But we also wanted to capture the non-classroom instructional staff that we have allowed, like deans and school counselors or testing coordinators, if they are covering for a full entire day and not getting any planning time, that they are also taking advantage of getting paid at their regular hourly rate of pay for that planning period. And so when we proposed the 1 hour for a single coverage or 1.5 hours for a block period of coverage, we were looking for continuity across the district because some planning periods are 5-minute difference, 10-minute differences. And so I had written some notes down, but then as I was going back through and reviewing this, I couldn't remember the conversation from your side because I don't have a check mark next to this.
I'm always here, but I don't remember either.
Article?
Teacher Article 6, 6.3.
Page 5.
Yeah, it is page 5. The page numbers are not numbered on this copy.
It's about compensation, right?
Yes, because right now we currently are compensating classroom teachers if they voluntarily give up their planning period to cover a class. And we wanted to codify that non-classroom teachers could also take advantage like we've allowed them to do under the MOU. But what we were trying to do is find some continuity that it was 1 hour and 1.5 hours versus varying planning periods. But I don't have notes that we were good with it or what the discussion was.
I'm not sure we got to the place where we were this far down the track.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because I kind of wanted to talk about the philosophy of the non-instructional staff we're directed to cover. And bear with me a minute,
Yeah.
because we're talking about this article and covering classes, but in a separate conversation, I know I've spoken with your staff and the fact that for the dual enrollment piece, where I've got guidance counselors or deans, let's just say the same group that come in and they teach a few sections of the dual enrollment. And we've had a concern or an issue that, okay, while they're in covering doing that part of instruction, there's a part of that job description component that we need them to do for a dean for discipline or the guidance counselor needs to be meeting in an IEP meeting or following up on a behavior matter that's not getting done. I see that as a parallel because it overlaps here as well.
Yeah.
So I would like to just maybe hear your feedback too, relative to the need. I know they're being asked to go in, but I got to tell you, I'm concerned, where I sit because of the function of those positions not getting done as well. 100%.
And actually, that's probably been the number one complaint that we've heard this year as far as coverage. And actually specifically from our ESE teachers that are supposed to be providing resource or inclusion, that they're being pulled. And then you have students with disabilities where their IEPs are not, their minutes are not being met. And we're going to be on the hook for compensatory services in the summer because they haven't had their minutes met. And so deans and school counselors are going to be in that same category because you have functions of that job when they are being pulled for coverage that their job function is not able to be done. And then they're being asked to do it outside of their duty hours because the job still has to be done.
And deans and guidance don't specifically have like a planning period. where they
Yes,
go
yes,
off
yes.
to the Side and.
And that's why when we had the discussion earlier in the first semester with Jason, with the MOU to get clarity, we had deans that were being pulled for an entire day. And so when they were pulled for an entire student contact day, we had agreed that we would pay them whatever that planning period was for their regular hourly rate of pay, because they were being pulled from their job the entire student contact day. Kind of, it's very similar to what a classroom teacher would be. They'd be covering the full student contact day.
And I will say in transparency, I'm conflicted by it because with the dual enrollment, we want the higher academics, we want the advanced academics, and sometimes we're limited by those who are certified who can do it because of advanced degrees. And the same is here. You've got a classroom full of children that need supervision. So
Yeah.
I am torn by it.
Yeah. Well, and that's why knowing that coverage has been an issue and it's probably not going to get much better next year. That's why we wanted to have this in place. So if a non-classroom teacher or a school counselor or a dean was pulled for the entire student contact day, knowing in the background that your school counselors and your deans and really your ESE inclusion teachers should be the last people on the list to pull.
I agree.
Right. Ahead of everything else, unless you're in dire straits for coverage. Because we all provide a vital role. But student services specifically, those folks are vital, with that. And providing accommodations to our kids and just student services in general. Or discipline for the entire school. And so we wanted to cover that for those folks in the event that they did have to give up their entire day, that they were at least compensated, because they probably are going to have to do something outside of their duty day if they weren't able to perform their actual job functions covering a class for an entire
I
school
think the
day.
difference is what you just said, though. Is there an expectation or is it going to be a requirement? Because if we're double dipping and paying in addition to for that time, then there is an expectation that they must accomplish those duties outside of their normal day.
Well, and that's why we had when
That's fine. If we're going to state that,
Yeah.
we pay this rate, the expectation is
Mhm.
they will absolutely conclude their daily requirements that they would have normally completed during that time after hours, but not for additional compensation because they've already been paid for it during the day.
Who's making the decision to pull them?
their building principal.
Right. So the building principal is making the decision. So the building principal needs to be thinking.
Well, let's be clear though, the need necessitates pulling them. So if the argument is, if the position is that this person forfeiting their planning time,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
In order to cover this class, they should get additional compensation because they're going to perform those duties outside the school day later. I'm fine with that.
Mhm.
But so long as we capture that in the language, then that's the expectation. Because you will conclude those activities and responsibilities outside your duty.
But the flip side of that coin is that there's expectation that the principal or the supervisor who's making this decision is thinking this through and thoroughly before making that call, because then I can see it getting out of hand. In other words, I'm going to pull you because you have to work. You'll get paid. You have to work after hours on a regular basis. The money's going to get old pretty quick.
Well, I don't see that being the issue. I see the issue being how do we fairly balance to make sure that there's a rotating schedule. for
Okay,
assignment.
well, now you're expanding a little bit more on the rotation.
That's how we've addressed this issue previously. I'm just not accepting the assumption that every principal is going to target individuals saying,
I agree.
force you to work an extra hour.
I agree. The ones that will land on our desk will be the ones where the principal seems to be doing that on a regular basis without any forethought of the oration. This is really necessary,
Yeah.
right?
Well, Fredo, to your point, it says teachers may volunteer. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I would argue that,
Mhm.
no, I've got to do my planning. I've got
But we're
to.
talking about two different groups. So
Right, right.
let's stick with the non-instructional group first and address that.
Yeah, because with the classroom teacher, that's actually fairly straightforward. But any non-classroom instructional staff who is directed to cover a classroom for the entire student contact day will receive their regular hourly rate of pay for 1 hour for a single period coverage, or for 1.5 hours for a block period coverage.
With the expectation that any work not performed or not completed during your normal regular hours because you were pulled will be completed after hours.
And I guess
Right.
with that statement, what I would maybe be cautionary about is that if they're paid for an hour, the expectation is that they would work an extra hour, right? But if they're being pulled for the entire student contact day, we're not just going to pay them for an extra hour and then expect them to work 7.75 additional hours because they weren't able to do their job for the entire school day.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
Right. Okay.
So the goal is to compensate them if they forfeit lunch or planning time, correct?
Planning time.
Right. Because if they are forced to forfeit an entire day, that's an issue that becomes the district and the school's issue to deal with compensatory services later. That's not the employee's issue
Okay.
because they're already being paid for their day. But if they're I do not disagree. Anybody who forfeits their planning time, their lunch time should be compensated.
Mhm.
I'm in complete agreement. I just want to be careful with the language when we say, because if we're saying the justification for that is they're losing out on something they're going to have to do later, that's not always true. And
So the expectation that for you volunteering during this allotted planning time, that time is made up. And I'm not saying it very eloquently.
No, I
I would just, I would say leave that alone, not
Yeah.
even address that issue altogether because it becomes too complicated.
Well, and that's, and just with past,
time is
yes.
your job responsibility.
Well, yeah. And actually, I was just going to say, like, when we pay people a sixth of their salary for teaching an extra period, that's that unsaid expectation that you're going to plan outside of that duty day because you're being compensated to take on that extra. So you're planning outside of the 7.75. So actually, I would agree, just that's part of your responsibilities. Kind of like how it's, so I don't know if we need an extra sentence there. Are you guys okay with the 1 hour and the 1.5 for continuity across the district? Knowing that planning times kind of vary.
Well, I'm going to say we're going to lean towards a yes, but I need to get Mr. Green involved because then it's going to become a scheduling mandate that everybody have the same length of schedule, period. Because if I'm not going to pay somebody who takes a block and only covers 70 minutes, the full 90 minutes. If we're going to say block and it's a 90-minute block, then everybody's going to 90-minute blocks. So we have to eliminate that differential that clearly exists across the school district. We shouldn't have had that type of flexibility to begin with in our scheduling. It's one of the reasons we're overstaffed in a lot of schools, is we created staffing issues for ourselves. I walk classrooms all the time. I went to a school the other day. The average classroom size at the middle school is 16 kids. They are way overstaffed.
Not my school.
They're losing units.
Okay.
It's not made up.
Sure.
I don't make those numbers up. I walk classrooms and I spent a lot of time, a lot of attention. In kindergarten, is one of those grade levels where there's a lot of overages, but I'll tell you, for middle school and high school in particular, when they got academies and they were promised that they would get 8 or extra, what do we call those positions? What's the title used for extra positions they were given to launch a program?
Attractive.
Attractors.
Factors, yeah.
But here we are 8 years, 10 years later.
They're still getting it.
Why? Sorry, it's not, and I'm not trying to drive class sizes up, but when we talk about having a consistent, I mean, Tony knows the numbers and so does Brian better than anybody, 130 to 155 reoccurring vacancies, we do it to ourselves. I could eliminate half those vacancies just by right sizing the district. So that's what's happening now. But we need to get to a master schedule and audit schedules and audit scheduling, which we've never done consistently before. And that's happening now. We don't even have a procedure guide for auditing classrooms. So all of that's happening now. And that's not intended to be punitive, even though some people are going to perceive it that way. But we've even said to Brian, and I'll throw it out here now, if we get close to the start of the school year and we still have a large number of vacancies, interventionists, reading coaches, everybody's back at the table because we're going to start reassigning them to classroom positions. I will not open the school year with a large number of vacancies in the instructional grades. I won't, especially elementary school. It's just not something we can do in good conscience. We did it all through this year and it has bothered me. because we have some kids who haven't seen anything but a substitute all year.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it gets back, and these are the same people being pulled to fill in for classrooms anyway. So
Yep.
it's not ideal. And that's why we're doing the best we can to aggressively recruit now.
Mhm.
And, you saw the board agree and provided additional staff so we can get out there and get ahead of everybody else. But we are having to level the ship a little bit
Mhm.
with our staffing allocations. And that's also should create flexibility to give us more positions that we're desperately in need of, like counselors and deans and more equity across our schools. So it's not an easy math process, as Jason and Heather will attest to. You have to come tell me no all the time. They don't like it.
So with the language in C, then we sound like we have agreement with, you need to talk to Wayne.
I'd like to have an opportunity for the team and I to talk about this with Mr. Green. If we can get everybody to one consistent schedule for next year, which should not be difficult, then we should be okay.
Okay.
Unless somebody else on the team has a concern. I know that was our primary concern, right? Was the inconsistency in the schedule length.
I mean, we could put language in there at what the goal would be to get to a consistent, but until then, I'm fine with putting in there whatever the break is for that.
Okay,
Whatever their planning time is,
gotcha.
with the goal that we get to a consistent.
So question, just on the payroll finance side.
We can record, I mean,
Mhm.
payroll can keep,
Okay.
this school has this.
Okay, I guess I think you might have answered my question, but I'll ask it just to make sure. So with this year, with the way it's worked under the MOU with teacher planning time, that's been okay with them putting in, 0.75 for a 45-minute or point whatever it is for a 50-minute, that's been okay. So do we want to just for right now go back to whatever their planning time length is? If that's been that's worked and been okay?
That would work.
Okay,
Because if it changes and it's consistent, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
The language is there.
okay,
Whatever the planning period.
whatever the planning period is. So teachers will be compensated for
Raise the issue for discussion as to I'm still struggling with the non-classroom instructional staff, why they're in here, because they're directed. They're very different. One volunteers,
Mhm.
and then they do have a designated planning, and they do have these designated periods, but the non-classroom staff,
Mhm.
that's going to be problematic,
Mhm.
because they're not going to have a schedule where the guidance counselor has,
Mhm.
this is his or her planning period, or the dean has a planning
Mhm.
period here or there. They get lunch, but I'm kind of wondering about, to be direct, why is it in here? Do we want to maybe strike it? Because this is the language that was presented here, staff were directed to do this. So
Mhm.
it's not even a volunteering thing. And they can be
Mhm.
directed for various days or for
Well, I think
activities as needed.
the reason we had put this in here was to address at the beginning of the year under the MOU language that teachers were allowed to volunteer and give up their planning time and be compensated.
Mhm.
We had non-instructional, non-classroom teachers that were being directed to go into a classroom their full day and then not having any time to actually do what they needed to do with their essential functions of their job. And when principals, and because it was new language, principals hadn't really dealt with this before. We had some principals that were paying their planning period pay to those non-classroom folks, but then we had some principals that weren't. And so I think the one we specifically had was a dean that was being pulled and directed to cover a class all day. And then they weren't being allowed to have this, and we rectified that because those non-classroom instructional staff can be directed, right? They can have their duties reassigned temporarily. And that's why we had used the language directed, because they don't have, a set planning period, et cetera, but they're giving up their entire student contact day, not doing their essential functions of their job to cover a class. And so since they are under the teacher contract, we wanted to make sure that they were getting compensated similarly to a classroom teacher. And I think that is why the language was different for non-classroom, because they can have their duties reassigned temporarily. And so, but we wanted to compensate them for being pulled for an entire student contact day. Now, if they're only pulled to cover a class, or coverage here and there, and their whole day is not taken up, they don't get this. But it's when their entire student contact day has been redirected into a classroom and they're not getting to do their actual job function. We wanted to compensate them for that, whatever that planning period length was, so that, because they are expected to take care of some of their essential functions outside of that duty day. The job didn't just go away because they were subbing in a class. And so that was the conversation that Jason and I had earlier in the first semester to rectify that. And so since we were wanting to put this in our contract for classroom teachers, we wanted to address that specifically for our non-instructional, for non-classroom teachers, so that we didn't have that same miscommunication and that everybody was on the same page.
I appreciate the background. And I did notice the language of the entire student contact day. So that is a qualifier.
Yes. So it's not like they're just being pulled for maybe a classroom. Oh, I need you here. It's if they are pulled for their entire student contact day, that's when they would have access to them. So it was to try to capture what we had worked out earlier in the first semester. So go ahead. Sorry.
Heather or Jason, remind me, what's the additional period supplement cost?
It depends. It's a 1/6 of their salary for secondary. And then I think for elementary, if they use their entire student contact, it is like
So
1 hour, their regular hourly rate of pay.
can be a $6,000 to $8,000.
It was about 4.6 million last time I looked at it.
Yeah.
For the whole year, because that's one of the costs that.
You what we paid,
Yes,
what we approved?
yes.
But just so I understand, the secondary, it's 1/6 of their
Salary.
What is the average salary?
60, including benefits.
But you wouldn't include benefits to do the 1/6, it's without benefits. So your average is like 51 without benefits.
How do you legally not include benefits?
Because they are paid anyway. Your retirement would go up and your.
Right, your retirement, you're gonna pay the retirement.
Yeah. But that's a function of the increase. You wouldn't include benefits for the 1/6.
Right.
51 would be.
Yeah.
I think 51 is about where we're at average.
They took the health out.
Does
Yeah.
PEA object to additional period supplement?
No, but we do have the qualifier in there that it doesn't preclude you not looking for a vacancy.
Correct.
And that's why that language is in there. So it's not just I don't want to hire an extra person, so I'm going to offer 5 people extra period pay. And that's already in our contract. But no, we don't object to it in its concept because it is useful. It's a useful tool. And some people really like it. They would rather work straight, get that 1/6 of their salary and do their planning on their own time.
Well, it benefits both parties. quite
Yeah.
frankly. I did it a lot as a principal.
Yeah.
And I've shared that with the team.
Yeah.
So for example, here it's 1/6 of the salary. Respectfully, I can cover 6 sections out of that, not forfeit the planning period at all,
Mhm.
and pay my middle school or high school teachers the extra period supplement. And still probably stay under the average for
Yeah.
the teacher average salary. So for me.
22.8.
And if you're in a bind,
sections covered,
yeah.
then not in my, especially those teachers who are at the lower end of the pay grade who want to make that extra money, who
Mhm.
typically volunteer first.
Yeah.
Get what they want out of it.
Mhm.
And I get a quality teacher rather than having to put a sub in. So I just wanted to kind of get a sense of where you guys are
Yeah.
at.
Well, and I know even last year, some of our bigger high schools, you would be hard pressed to find somebody that actually had a planning period. Most people, because of,
Such as you guys are virtual though.
well, they were shortage, there was other things, and they just, it's harder, it was harder to start hiring, and then we've seen that into this year.
It's not ideal, but.
No, it's not ideal.
So for example, a Boone
Mhm.
that struggles with filling all their vacancies, that's a good strategy that he could utilize
Mm-hmm.
because it's not because of the school, it's largely because of their location. It's
Yeah.
a struggle to
To get
fill
people
that
there.
school and it's not, to Polk City Elementary.
Polk City Elementary.
She gets a lot of turnover because they're so close to Osceola that people jump and go there because there's just not a whole lot in Polk City.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that Polk? I got it right? Polk City.
Polk City's not close to Osceola.
No,
That'd be
It's not only.
She's close to someone.
Yeah.
She's close to Wayne County is what she's
She-
close to.
that's what-
Laurel over in Point Sienna.
Boone jumps out because I just
Boone.
know how persistent the vacancies. have been.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that is a strategy, especially at secondary, that they've been utilizing over the last 2 years is we haven't been able to hire. And, it costs so much money, but also you're saving it because you're not paying for another employee with benefits.
Well, I'm gonna be honest, from perspective as a building leader, from a district perspective, I'm not paying a planning grant.
Yeah.
No, because I don't, well, let me rephrase that. If I hire a teacher, I forfeit a planning period. If I can hire 6 teachers at the 1/6 rate, and there's no planning period there. So actually I get more sections, so I can actually reduce class sizes and everything else for everybody else. It works. So I'm just.
Now, I will say on the flip side, and we've even heard this from principals, and I'm sure you have too, when you have a good chunk of your staff not having a planning period, it's hard, you can't really do PLCs and stuff like that.
But it's just good to know. So when I have those schools that have those pockets, it may make sense for us, but then that becomes a school that we may target with planning time some other way.
Yeah. Okay.
Is that a proposal?
No,
Okay. Not yet, I guess.
we're not there yet.
So teachers will be compensated at their regular hourly rate of pay for the time of their planning period.
I just have to say that he did blush when you said it.
I did blush.
So let's get back for a minute. Teachers will be compensated at their regular hourly rate of pay for the time of the planning period. That sound fine?
Sounds good.
In C, do you want to say classroom to distinguish or you're making it generic?
Oh, yeah, actually, that's probably a good addition to Laura, since we've specifically addressed not in classroom instructional staff. So I'll add classroom teachers for the time of their planning.
To their planning period.
Yeah, for the time equivalent to their planning. Okay. And then we're okay then with the sentences addressing the non-classroom, since it would be for the entire student contact day. And then I guess I'll mirror the language. I'll strike out the 1 hour and the 1.5. It'll be for the time equivalent to that school's planning period. Okay, is that good? The school scheduled planning period.
Thank you.
Yeah, to their school's
That's part of the
scheduled planning period.
I mean, I understood it all. but
Yeah, okay.
to say that, I think it's very clear.
Okay. So then that's mirrored in both. So equivalent to the time of the school scheduled planning period will be mirrored in both of those. Okay. All right. We got that worked out. I'll type that up when we caucus on 4 real quick. So the other thing that we wanted to come back to it's on the same page, was this 6.3-1. And I know, I think Mr. Hyde at this point had to leave for book review at that point. And so Brian and the district team had rejected this addition, but I wanted to make sure, I wanted to come back and revisit this. A couple of years ago, when we had tentatively agreed to and then ratified to change the early release structure to where there's 7 early release days, teachers ended up getting 6 of those. Admin got 1 for staff development early release. And so when that changed, the language, because it was stricken through, even though that was a past practice, it was a past practice that on staff development, even early release weeks, that teachers didn't have to have a PLC that week because they were getting 180 minutes of additional PLC or staff development time. And so with the addition of the 3 to make 10, so now we're back to admin having 4 early release staff development days, which is really 180 minutes of staff development time, whether that's PLC or trainings or whatever they need. We want to protect the teacher planning period that week. And so that even on early dismissal staff development days or shortened, weeks due to a holiday, that teachers get their full 4 days of self-directed planning. since the admin is getting an additional 180. Now, this does not include teacher workday early release. So the 6 that teachers have, admins still get their PLC time because that's not considered a shortened week as far as planning is concerned. But with admin getting 4 now of early release staff development time, which is an extra 180 minutes, and we all know that early release days are hectic during the day, and some teachers don't get planning at all during that day, depending on their specific schedule. Some people may only get 20 minutes. Some people I think I've seen a schedule that had 15 minutes of planning time, depending on the school's situation. The other 4 days, we want to ensure that those teachers get their 4 self-directed planning time, since the admin's getting 180 minutes on that early release day. And so it's 4 weeks. And we want to ensure that those teachers get their 4 directed, because the admin's getting 180.
So the only thing I would say is, I urge some caution in the way we're phrasing that. The admin isn't getting 180 minutes. The admin's affording staff 180 minutes of additional training opportunity. Training is not the same as planning time. And the two should never be conflated with each other. And I understand that PEA takes issue with the way trainings and stuff were done in the past, but these additional days were being provided specifically to support the one-to-one rollout. If you're telling me that staff don't need those extra days, then we'll change the calendar next year and pull them back. Because I don't want to conflate the two issues. So simply because we're affording staff extra training opportunity with no additional burden of having to monitor students or do anything else, I don't want that confusion out there. I think we were very gracious in how we approached the schedule, its development, and its placement. We no longer put days immediately before or immediately following a holiday to create additional disruptions for staff. They're placed immediately adjacent to holidays. That benefits staff, it benefits students. Those are low attendance and census days in high schools anyways. And so staff largely, I think maybe even to your point, Stephanie, don't really have a lot that they're managing those school days anyways. I know I hear from my own son who has to go to school on those days. Now, I can't speak to the elementary environment, but I can say I'm somewhat concerned that the perception is this is planning time when it's not. It's PD time. And I know that we have to make sure that our trainings are intentional and very well focused moving forward. But that was part of what we were going to negotiate through Collaborative Council this year, was over the next 2 years. The expectation is we will implement Schoology in all components with 100% fidelity by the end of the second year. That's a very reasonable expectation. 2 years is incredibly gracious. And that's why we knew for the next 2 years, we'd have to add early release days. So I'm a little concerned that we would say no PLC time. It's 4 weeks. So walk me through it one more time so I make sure I understand. What you're asking for is on those 4 extra early release days that we had. We didn't have 4. We added.
Well, it's 3, but there's 4 staff development early release days total.
So for the 3 days we added, you're asking that for those specific weeks that they not have to have a PLC time?
That they would get their full 4 self-directed planning periods.
So here's the only thing. I think we need to look at the calendar. Because they make, if I don't agree, but I'm always about flexibility. If we were to visit this topic, I need to know where those days are falling to ensure that there's not a time-sensitive issue that should be addressed as part of the early release. So if we're going into testing season, for example, and we can use that as an opportunity to do some one-to-one training, but also to do the testing procedures review with all the staff, then that's what should be done. I'd hate to forfeit it that time. And maybe we could look at the calendar and say, even though this is a full 5-day week, we're going to agree to forfeit that time here versus during that calendar. Are you following me?
Say that again.
So let's say that the first week of May is one of those early release Fridays. We just kicked off testing at the high school secondary levels. We may say we don't agree to use this first week of May to forfeit that time, even though there's an early release, right?
Okay.
And we would ask to forfeit that time someplace else in the schedule. That may be a full 5-day week.
I see.
right? It's not an early release, it's not an abbreviated
I see.
schedule.
I see what you're
But because there's sensitivity to what's going on,
saying.
we need to be responsive to that and ensure that we have the opportunity if needed. But.
Well, but principals also have, I mean, they can call a faculty meeting and have set faculty meetings, but we have very few principals probably across the district that actually hold faculty meetings in the times that they could disseminate that kind of information. And so
And I just use that as one example.
Yeah.
There are other examples that would come to mind. So I would say if the issue is, let me rephrase this. If the interest is teachers want that time back elsewhere, that's fine. I would just simply ask, does it have to be during those weeks? Now, I'm not saying yes yet. I'm just saying if we can create some flexibility to say, if it's timed,
Mhm.
as long as we flex that time back someplace else, who cares where it's at? Why does it have to be the early release day?
So for example, and I'm just talking out loud right now. So for example, maybe with a week within that week of the early release, so like the week before, the week after, there's flexibility to where if the principal needed a PLC during that early release week, they could give up their PLC time either the week before or the week after. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Just if the flexibility could be there to move that requirement elsewhere, I'd have to look at the calendar. I don't want
So
to.
then that allows some flexibility for schools because 165 school sites, they all have varying needs. But then that also, I mean, it essentially gets the time back to the teacher, just not within that week.
I like that. If you spread it or let it go too far, it'll get forgotten, but.
Well, that's why you'd have it in the.
But we would put it on the calendar, so it's established. I mean, I'm not even gonna give them flexibility, I'm gonna be honest with you. We would just say, we're gonna place it on the calendar if it's a yes.
Okay.
I'm still struggling with why it's an ask. I don't understand the ask.
Well, the ask is just historically too, just so you have the whole picture. On the early release day, most of them actually aren't getting a real planning period on that early release time because of the schedules. They might get 20 minutes, they might get 25, they may not get any, depending on the schedule.
Who's that primary? Is that true primarily for elementary? Because I don't see that at secondary.
Secondary, I mean, I know my planning was maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
But is that proportionate with how long your class period was?
Yes, because the
You're
class
still
period.
Getting through 6th period or 7th period.
Yes. But that because of the shortened class periods, because of the shortened schedule, most people may see 20 minutes, 25 minutes. I'm not sure. I think elementary varies. Some elementaries they go straight through.
Yeah, elementary, I can see it because of the way the specials work.
Yes. And so some aren't getting a planning period at all, particularly at the elementary level. I know secondary tends to follow the truncated straight 7 or whatever it is. And then your planning period's 20 minutes or 25.
Even the high schools, Brian, you may not know, or Jason, you guys may know. For high schools, study school has, they also have a traditional schedule. So on an early release day, if do they always default to a full period, 7th period schedule? They don't.
I think it depends.
We're straight blocks, so
Who?
part-time.
Yeah, Jenkins is not.
Yeah,
They're
but
a blend.
we don't.
And some of them did modified
straight
blocks. Yeah. Well, and again, that goes to consistency. But so the impetus of this was to protect self-directed planning time during
I
those weeks.
successfully negotiate when everybody does whatever the hell. No wonder this has been.
Sorry. Sorry.
Well, I feel sorry for my team. Just holy cow.
So
Why don't we take a caucus? Is that real quick? Is that okay?
So let's look at Article 4. We had some discussions about that.
Real quick.
One of the things I want to talk about a few ideas around this early dismissal idea, and I'm sure you guys do as well. So what time is it?
We're 35.
Do you think maybe 10 minutes and we'll check in with each other?
Yeah.
Okay. I think 10 minutes will be enough time for us.
Just before we go in,
Okay.
so and I know Brian and Laura and everybody can give me the current practice. So right now, in the contract, there's flexibility for how many of those planning release days for there not to be a PLC day, a directed PLC day.
Not flexibility in the way that we have just described. Right now, they do not. So on a full staff development day, or a holiday, so like a Veterans Day, Memorial, whatever it is, on a holiday, if it's a shortened week because of a holiday or full staff development, principals cannot have a PLC that week. Teachers get their for self-directed. And that's where this is coming from, is we wanted to line that up because they're still getting a shortened planning period or no planning period on the early release day. And so we wanted to protect because it's a shortened week. So if they're not in attendance or if it's a full staff development day, and that's been in the contract for a very long time.
It was put in there because frankly, teachers were not getting planning time. And so we came to the table with it being a huge problem.
On a holiday week?
But so much of their time was being used for
Principal
meetings
directed.
and you name it, that we were able to talk to the district about how we kept their planning time intact. And so in a week that was short for some reason, that then the principals would not have a PLC that week, so that the teachers would have 4 days of planning.
How would that
And in a
apply?
staff development day, let me just say, on a work day, the principals still get 90 minutes of a full work day. It's the teacher time, but principals still can have up to 90 minutes of that day to have
60 minutes now.
60 minutes now, forgive me, to hold a faculty meeting or a quick training.
How do some of these rules apply to a 0.5 employee, part-time employee, a half-day employee? Is there an expectation that a 0.5 employee get a planning period?
We don't really deal with too many teachers. I mean, the only part-time instructional are probably through Steve Cochran with part-time vocational folks.
Do they get a planning?
The pause you're getting is we've moved away from the 0.5
Yeah.
teachers because we used to do them
What?
and we would do them with benefits and it became a cost prohibitive for teachers. So we didn't do part-time instructional. We're just now, you're starting to see some language of part-time for the industrial and, for the other folks that we're starting to move back that direction.
Well, the reality is I think we're going to be forced to
I agree.
with the workforce issue.
So we've not thought about the spinoff of the application of the 0.5.
Yeah. It's really has,
If there's more federal policy that comes into play, the amount of time without a break kind of thing. All right.
okay. All right. So we'll 10 minutes to check in. We pause.
Circle's lit, so we should be.
All right. So we are back from caucus and a short lunch, or I guess dinner break. So we will start back. So I sent Laura and you guys an email just now with what we had typed up with Article 4 and Article 6 of some of the discussion we've had. And in Article 4, what I included were the two pieces. Actually, there were two pieces of TA language with the neutrality clause and the probationary contract, and I included that in there. So just to review, obviously we have the non-discrimination clause update. I struck through policy advisory letters and letters of concern and just said letters of expectation are not form of discipline and may address issues related to professionalism or policy. And then I included where there was the TA language, so you knew it was from March 10th on both of those pieces. And then the attendance. What we talked about in the second sentence. So we were good with regular and prompt attendance is an essential job function for all employees. And so in the second sentence, employees who are absent from duty must be on, and we struck through and approved, must be on a contractually recognized leave. Because right now, personal leave and sick leave aren't approved. They're submitted and given notice, but they're not approved by a principal if they have sick leave or if they're taking personal leave that they have on the books.
You mean personal chargeable sick?
Yes. Yeah. Personal charge to sick. And so those aren't approved. They just have to give notice that they're taking them, right? And so we wanted to say contractually recognized leave because that includes all the paid leaves and unpaid leaves that are already in our contract. Okay.
Let's.
Yeah, no issue.
Okay, so I'm just gonna delete then and approved. And then we're gonna keep a contractually recognized leave. Okay. And that was it for 4. So I think if we're ready, we can TA on this. Okay. Save it. And then,
Go wait at the printer.
okay. Okay. So while that's going, let's go to 6. And so I don't know if we want to TA on 6 today, if we come to an agreement on this, because there's one thing that we want to talk with you guys about in the placement review committee. I think we've had our first appeal to the superintendent for where the teacher did not agree with the decision from the placement review committee. And statute just says that the teacher can appeal to the superintendent, and then it gives no parameters. And so we don't want to parameter it to death, but we wanted to talk through maybe what a timeline would look like so that everybody, if they do, and we don't really have too many, but we wanted to talk through maybe what a time frame would look like so that everybody is treated the same and that there's no ambiguity there. And so that people know and understand what it looks like to appeal to the superintendent. And so we don't necessarily have to talk about that today. And I know we wanted to flesh that out with you maybe a little bit further, but we just wanted a timeline in place so people knew what that looked like, since statute is silent on what that actually looks like. And so I don't know if we want to TA on this today or just know that we've reached an agreement if we do, and then we can close that up later, or what your prerogative was with that. But on page 5, letter C, based on the discussion in the notes I wrote, classroom teachers may volunteer to cover classes during their planning period. Teachers will be compensated at their regular hourly rate of pay for the equivalent of their school's scheduled planning period. Any non-classroom instructional staff who is directed to cover a classroom for the entire student contact day will be compensated at their regular hourly rate of pay for the equivalent of their school's scheduled planning period. Instructional staff will use a special activity payroll reporting process. Okay.
We have an agreement.
On that part. Okay, perfect. Now, what I did in 6.3-1 is I took out our addition of early dismissal. And then I wrote another piece trying to capture what we had talked about with that flexible part. And so what I had added under that first sentence was during weeks when there is during weeks when there is an early dismissal staff development day, a principal supervisor may hold a PLC collaborative planning during this week. If a PLC collaborative planning is held by the principal supervisor during an early dismissal staff development week, the principal supervisor will forfeit their PLC collaborative planning period either the week before or the week after the scheduled early dismissal staff development day. And so that gives flexibility to the building principal and the schools that if they do need to hold a PLC during the early dismissal staff development, they can. But then we were talking through, and if we want to make that it's all before, it's all after, or it's going to be designated in the calendar.
Well, I think relative to it living on,
Mhm.
the before after is a starting place, but looking to where we were going to be in the 22-23 school year by the calendar, we did some looking when we were in caucus as well. And for the 4 dates of staff development for next year's calendar, the August 26th date works for the before after.
Okay.
October 7th would be an issue in the fact that the week after is FTE week.
Okay.
So I'm thinking that might be a challenge. So I would say we would default to the week before.
Okay.
That must be the option. And then the February 17th staff development, I think there's a problem to flex there because the 20th is President's Day, so that we lose the before after. So just so we know, when there's not an option, it would default to the other one.
Well, then why don't we say maybe
April 28th worked.
maybe this is how we fix it. Cause we were talking about this with a district this size. I think we do want to designate when that flex option is available, either before or after through the calendar. And so maybe what we say is they'll forfeit their PLC collaborative planning period either the week before or a week after as designated in that year's school calendar, so that they know if it's designated the week before or the week after.
I was just, I think there's a verb missing. The principal server will forfeit their PLC collaborative planning period made up either the week before or the week after.
The principal supervisor will forfeit their PLC.
We're making it up on the early release is the point.
Yeah, so they're taking it on the early release week instead, and they're gonna forfeit either the week before or the week after. So I don't read it that way.
Start again.
But I think if we say as designated in that year's school calendar, and then we administratively either designate it the week before or the week after. And then that way, every school, there's continuity that if they do choose to invoke that, they know they have to give it up the week before or the week after as designated in the calendar.
Or if you, not to throw a wrench in it, or you say in the next available week.
I would, because I think in a district this size, I think we have to designate it so that it's not forgotten.
Before, after, and then the specificity to the calendar annually, we assign because that was another conversation we had in transparency was, to give the latitude of the before after is quite a bit for principal and for the conversations you and I have with your team. It's kind of nice to know what it's supposed to be, and then we can market it to the principals and everybody. It's succinct.
Yes, I think, I agree with you there. So after the scheduled early dismissal staff development as designated in that year's school calendar. So adding that in.
Annual school.
In the annual.
Board approved school calendar?
Yeah.
In the board approved school.
Did we say student early dismissal days beginning during weeks when there is a student early dismissal?
That's fine. So as designated in the board approved school calendar. There is a student.
If you don't mind plugging me back in.
Okay, so during weeks when there is a student early dismissal staff development day, a principal supervisor may hold a PLC collaborative planning during this week. If a PLC collaborative planning is held by the principal supervisor during a student early dismissal staff development week, the principal supervisor will forfeit their PLC collaborative planning period either the week before or the week after the scheduled student early dismissal staff development day as designated in the board approved school calendar.
And then your thought is more on calendar committee will designate.
We'll designate it there.
Okay.
So whatever makes the most sense.
I think that's a good
All right. So do we want to TA this now? And then if we add stuff for the placement review, or do we verbally just note that we have a TA?
Let's ask.
Sorry.
Laura's my person of details. So we've already ratified and we have our 22-23 on there. So will this be on the 23-24? We are getting ready to go back to the table to do the 2-year run. We're going to try to get 23-24.
Can we amend it with the school board? And just say we're just, or can that be an administrative thing on our end, just for the workings of the calendar
You mean this language?
on this language?
No, we're talking about the board approved calendar that's
Yeah.
on the web and everywhere.
Can we amend it administratively? Because it really doesn't change. It's just holding up a contract. Do we need a board vote? Because we're not changing any days off.
What were we changing on the?
We would just be noting that the principal would have to make it up here, like an asterisk. I don't think we have to go back for board approval for
We're
that.
gonna prescribe what weeks.
Yeah, because we're not changing a day off or an early dismissal day. Yeah, the calendar is not changing.
It's just the
Yeah.
use of the date.
We're just changing. And so I think that's more of an internal mechanism that we don't have to go out for board
I
approval
think
for
it's
that.
as simple as a table to put out principles
Yeah.
and trainings and whatever.
Yeah. I don't think we have to redo a vote or anything like that. Because we're not changing the days around.
All right.
Okay. So do you want to do like a note that we're verbally good with this? And then if we add placement review committee, oh, I guess I should ask, are you agreeable to adding in maybe a timeline for the superintendent appeal for how that looks
Oh,
for placement review?
From a kid, from a classroom.
Just so there's no ambiguity and not taking away his right to render a decision, but just having a time frame in which that
Put
happens.
this back another way too. So we've looked at language tonight that we've already been scrolling through. TA, whatever,
Mhm.
date TA. Could we not go ahead and TA what we've agreed on the night and then?
I'm okay with
date
that.
On it and then,
Yeah.
and if we come back and talk about this
That's
next.
fine.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
Philosophical discussion ready for.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
We'll-
He said he's ready for this.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's-
Okay,
that
so
makes sense.
that was the only. There's nothing else. And you guys, just to review, because we don't have a T on this, but we did have a verbal okay with the Labor Management Committee, because that's in 6.7-5
Hold on.
at the end. Since we didn't TA on this, but we had added this in the committee structure. The district and the association agree to work together for mutual benefit of the faculty, staff, and students. Site administrators and association building representatives shall establish a site-based joint labor management committee within the work site. This committee will be composed of at least one of the work site's elected association building representatives, the principal supervisor, and a balance of up to 5 other employees, which should include paraeducators and ESPs and site administrators. The committee will meet quarterly or as often as needed to discuss issues, concerns, suggestions, and ideas related to the work site, the faculty, and the staff, and promote a better understanding between the association and the work site. This committee will also advise principal supervisors on recruitment and retention issues. This committee will have no authority to modify or interpret the collective bargaining agreements or replace the grievance procedures. I think we had a robust discussion about this when we had introduced this on the 29th. If my notes serve me.
So I need to slow the roll on 6.75 and I need to I'll offer some discussion.
Okay.
I think that there's a few things that I want to put out just as it's a no at this time, but I want to offer that I think some of this could be rolled into some of the committee work that we're already doing through what the superintendent putting out, all of the subcommittees that are going on. And I think an issue that we also have with the language is shall was a very strong word. And if you remember when we discussed this originally, I offered the discussion of may, which totally changes, shall to a may. I thought, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I thought that was a point we were discussing between parties at that time. But I think that would be a consideration that I would like to push back over is just to change the shall to may. And that's going to put us down the road, maybe for the next discussion.
Okay, so if it goes to May, then what comes down the road? So, okay.
Is this TA-able if we change it to a May?
I would prefer to have the may language in there.
Okay.
And then I really would like to have concerned about another committee, if you will. I will tell you the shell to the may makes it softer. I mean, correct.
Yeah.
This is not a disagreement in philosophy of the purpose or the function or what this committee is to do, because I believe it has value. But I don't want to duplicate committee on committee work when we have all these other committees going on as well. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I know with the collaborative councils, that's more of a district-wide initiative, and this is more to address issues specific to a school site that may not necessarily need to be brought to like a collaborative council level, right? Because it's not a district-wide issue, it's a school-based issue. And, we've been very successful with schools that have implemented this because we've seen fewer issues come to our level, our level, your level, versus them just being dealt with at the school site. And so we saw value in bringing this in and codifying this so that every school had to have a working labor management. And really that's to increase morale, because when you work in a team aspect to solve issues, morale tends to improve at those school sites because you're working on issues together. We actually at our levels, not saying that we don't want work, but we get less of the little things that end up being solved at the lowest level before they become issues that we actually have to deal with. And so that was why we wanted the shall establish, so that we could have working labor management groups. And really, I think that empowers your site administrators and your staff, at those schools to really have a structure to solve problems like that at the lowest level. And that was why we wanted the shall, so that each school site would have to have something like this. And it kind of pushes staff and administration to work together, whereas maybe they haven't been accustomed to that before.
And respectfully, these are great discussions to have at every site. And some sites need them more than others. So what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is not every site shall have this or should necessarily, but if there are schools that are out there that are running a smooth machine right now. They've got, they got great recruitment, they've got harmony with their staff and community. And so this is just one more layer of, we got one more committee for you to meet. And if you don't, it's in contract and you can grievance. So that's why the may. And then I think that gives us the latitude to target and even put a little bit more of an impetus in there, working with regionals, working with the principals to the schools that we need to be in there, because it's happening organically, even without the language right now. We're all in there.
I won't say
organically.
Totally organically.
Well, organic by the fact that once there's an ember
like
that
that
drops in the forest somewhere, we all kind of are smoke jumpers and we land in this place and we start working on stuff.
So, I don't disagree. I think your reasoning, because this is new language, and this is, to be perfectly honest, I hope I'm not being offensive here, is really the dynamic of how this should play out at the site is foreign. So this is kind of nice to kind of see it evolve. So May is fine, but so we're just waiting for the superintendent's thoughts on it.
I think quite directly, May is gonna
Yeah, May's fine.
help me because we both understand clearly, I'm not playing a shell game here.
Mhm.
It's not a shell, it's a May, at the end of the day. And for me, those targeted schools where we all,
Mhm.
I just look over to Tony or Barry behind me and, we know where we end up. Those are schools where we would have regionals. We'd have a lot of people coming together and say, yeah, this is something that would really be beneficial for us to be on the front side of that. So I'm not looking to just arbitrarily wave the May around. You know what I'm saying?
So I guess when Mr. Hyde steps back in, so May, you think we'll get this TA'd?
I believe that.
So let's start TAing 4 while we're waiting for Mr. Hyde to step back in. And then we can ask his thoughts when he comes back in. And then that was it for 6. I'm glad I went through the rest of it. Okay.
Yeah, because May is the establishment, the community, and then everything below it will.
And again, I've attached the
And I've even
attendance
read
sheet.
it multiple times over with this tense toward, do I want to get in there and start shopsmithing the will be composed of, rather like it'll be composed of the following to include but not limited to, or including but not limited to. Because we may want to bring others in, but I don't think that's the spirit of the language to say it's just this group and we're locked out. We can't bring anybody else in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And the way I've seen it function is on organically, they invite guests to, if there's a specific issue.
I could see parents could be a part of this. I could see stakeholders, businesses. I could see multiple.
Yeah, I would not bring
Where you go with it.
Yeah, I would not bring
Because
businesses or.
you've brought the end of it in there relative to
Well, they can have input in the SAC committee and other
Yeah, they
mechanisms.
but you brought in recruitment. I think it was down here. Did I read that?
Yeah, but we had a line through our.
What was that, Barry?
This committee will also advise site principals / supervisors on recruitment and retention
Yes.
issues. We have that line through.
Why? It's advise. Oh,
Why wouldn't you want the insight of the employees there about what would attract and retain people at the school?
Well,
We are the experts in our school sites.
and specifically, I have folks in HR that could be a part of that's what they do all day long, is to know how to tap those resources. So, again, I think this could be a collaboration, a good collaboration. So, Mr. Hyde, we were just discussing language on the Labor Management Committee. And we had discussion of basically taking it from we shall establish a site base to changing that to may, giving us the option and removing the shall. And the language beyond the may establishes what the committee will be composed of and what the committee will be responsible for. And I kind of wanted your feedback otherwise on 6.7, item 5.
I didn't hear, I didn't get the background on the request.
So we've been successful where we've established labor management committees to help have a structure to help site administrators and staff work out issues. And they may not even be contractual issues. They may just be, morale issues, whatever. And so instead of it becoming a grievance or becoming something that's bigger, that they've really taken hold and ownership of what should happen in solving issues at the lowest level. And so we wanted to codify that structure so that we could really have a mechanism in place to expand this to maybe schools that maybe, quite honestly, need this structure in place, but maybe have been resistant to it. And so
How's it different than SAC and why is this an additional layer?
So SAC I think it's different because these are staff issues and not necessarily community or parent issues. And not, they're not necessarily looking at student data or anything like that. Like, it could be as simple as printers where there's no toilet paper in the restrooms and what we need to do about it. Because those are issues that sometimes end up coming to us because they don't have a mechanism to resolve them there.
But isn't that the purpose of a building rep?
Well, building reps, but it also brings in a group of people, and it's not just a building rep. It empowers more of your staff to get involved with these issues. So, for example, at one of our schools, it's a new school, staff weren't used to not having their own printer, right? And in the new school, they had hubs for printers. And so that was a big gripe that we ended up having to deal with, but they worked it out when we established a labor management committee with their admin and then they kind of start to take onus, and the building rep does kind of lead that, or a building rep can lead that. But it's those issues that may not even be contract issues. It's just changing, I guess, the dynamic.
Dynamic at the school level. We have all sorts of committees that are at district level. And I think establishing a committee, a labor management committee where, site administrators, the rep, and maybe some other folks can sit and have a conversation and discuss any pertinent issues relevant to their specific schools, like printers, or I'm trying to think of what else was out there.
We even had a school last year that their admin wouldn't let them wear jeans at all, even on Fridays. And so, but through a labor management committee, they came to a solution with that, and that made staff feel heard and happy. And it's those types of things.
Yeah, and every school sort of runs, I shouldn't say every school, but at least the ones that I've worked with, everyone does it a little bit differently. One may meet once a month, one quarterly, depending on the need or what's happening at the time. But it opens up the lines of communications. It establishes trust. It puts these issues that really should be dealt with at the school site in the forefront. Now, if it gets really complex or there's something kind of going on, so they'll reach out to me or to in your case to regional, I suppose. But it really does kind of help open up those doors, those lines of communications at that level. I've found them quite helpful. I think a lot of the reps have found them helpful. I think they make a lot of sense, and it should be an option in the contract for schools that may take advantage of those. There was a particular school, I shouldn't give the example, there was a particular school that I suggested maybe setting up a LMC just off to the side, kind of to discuss these issues that really are about communications at that level. And I respected the principal. The principal said, I'm good. That's fine. And a couple of weeks later, they're back on my radar, back on my desk, and the issue goes on and on and on. So this could help with those kind of conversations. They're very helpful and they're valuable in terms of time and effort.
And so we wanted to codify the structure that we found has worked. As we are trying to build bridges and relationships between site administrators and their staff and trying to solve issues at the lowest level.
Can I speak to this for just a second, since we established one this year? So what we had difference between, let's say, a building rep, which is what I serve as, and this was that we had teachers who had complaints that were similar, but we purposely established our labor management committee with non-union members as well. So they did not feel like they were getting the union side of the argument, so to speak. And so like one of the things we addressed this year was the staff was feeling very much that discipline was an issue and that the discipline wasn't being taken care of. So we pulled a dean in, we had a conversation. It really turned out to be more of a communication issue. But what we had was a meeting where we talked about what could we on the teacher side do differently. They talked about what they could do differently. It was a conversation. And we got some great ideas and tried to implement some new things out of it. So
That's the concern for me, in all due respect. Because while it says there, they have no authority to modify or interpret the collective bargaining agreement or replace the grievance procedures, it doesn't say anything about policy and practice. And so it's deficient in that regard, because this is exactly how schools develop their own way of doing things that are in violation, that aren't an issue now because the majority is in agreement with it, but in 2 years becomes an issue. And then we take a different approach saying, well, you never should have been allowed to do that. You never should have functioned that way. And so I am somewhat averse to the process because that is what you exist for as a building rep. And if it needs to come down to there's more than one or two individuals who are dealing with an issue, then with all due respect, it should be addressed to the faculty. But if there is already an existing process and policy in how these types of issues should be addressed. If you're looking for something more casual, then I would support the may rather than shall. It won't mandate it for every school. I do think we have to put some training wheels on. Let me be very honest.
We agree to that.
Yeah, we agreed
I
to
can-
changing
I
it to
can
May.
think of at least 2 instances this year where Kevin's been involved in one and you've been involved in one at schools where they have had an established way of work and an understanding, but now all of a sudden 1 or 2 members objects to that way of work and understanding. It becomes an issue that you guys are getting involved in and we're having to get involved. ESA is a good example.
Probably a contract. My assumption, that sounds familiar. That sounds like
That was the
a
contractual.
contractual thing. Yeah.
But they agreed as a faculty to basically function a certain way and it didn't become an issue until 1 or 2 people objected.
Yeah.
So that's the concern here is how do we prevent the committee from eroding and creating policy and practice that becomes their way of work? But then 2 years later, when they hire somebody new who objects to that way of work, it becomes an issue.
Here's how, and I'm going to push back a little bit on what you're saying because this is no different than the councils when you initially started proposed, right? Because the councils are having a broader. Well, I mean that's the way I'm seeing some of the language. I'm reading it right now. Some of the language.
The collaborative council serves with all due respect.
Yeah.
Before I make major decisions.
Right.
Ultimately boiled down, that's
exactly right. So the labor management committee boils down at the end of the day is the principal, right? It's not designed to strip the principal of any authority. It's not designed to strip the district of any policy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's designed to have that kind of level of communication. How do you avoid what you just said? One of the ways to avoid what you just said, which is, well, wait a minute, we've been doing this. We all agreed to do it this way, right? What happened now is by having one of these committees, because the way these things are happening, the way you describe them, is by not having these committees. In other words, the schools run, some of these decisions are being made sort of ad hoc community type of way, and they just do it. But in this kind of way, they get an opportunity to look at the contract, they get an opportunity to find out what works, what doesn't work. The principal gets an opportunity to ask questions about the contract as well. Policy gets brought into it. You can have those kind of discussions at that level, right? That as a way to resolve whatever the issue may be. Now, most of the issues that I've encountered, I think most of the issues that I've encountered when it comes to LMC have been fairly simple issues: printers, paper, copiers, jeans. Basic thing. That's the nature really of the kind of issues that pop up. When I've, at least not I, but at least what Kevin can speak to, when he's encountered issues of, well, we've always done it this way. Now somebody objects because this way violates a contract violation. That is totally different, and the language accounts for that. Because if the committee, those committees that have already met, right?
Here's the point: you don't know that happened, and I don't know that it happened.
So
you can give
what
me
happened?
assurance that just because it says it there, unless there is a process to vet what is being decided by senior admin, whether it's my office or your office, that is irrelevant. Unless that's rising to our level, you have no
That's the
way
issue.
to assure
They
me.
want to make sure the schools don't have that ability to. I am sorry, I disagree. I think this committee is designed at the school level so that site administrators and reps, as well as those that are not reps, can sit in a meeting and have those kind of conversations and resolve some of those issues.
Modifies practice without a vetting,
It wouldn't,
then our answer has to be no.
but it wouldn't. Well, I mean,
Provide no assurance the way this is currently written and structured. There's nothing in here about training the individuals prior to them becoming involved. There's no process in here about them having to vet content or a final decision, because while you're limiting it currently, because this is how it's been used, and this has been the examples that we can provide about Gene, about paper, there is nothing in here that restricts the topics that they can address. And if they turn around and remodify student discipline to say, well, we're not going to do discipline in accordance with the district's policies and procedures, then yes, I'm going to take issue with it.
Well, yeah, me too.
Yeah,
So would I.
we don't want
We don't want
Here's the
that.
problem. You won't know.
You don't know now. You don't know now.
We don't have the committee.
You don't know now.
Well, they're doing it though. So I guess I'll, the example I will offer, we already have in our contract that there's a non-instructional duty committee that should be meeting. And so we already have talked about how vastly different and principals have had lots of authority to dictate what their schedule looks like. And it's very different school to school, like what their schedule looks like, what their non-instructional duty schedules look like. It's all very different and fairly inequitable across the county. If you start looking at individual schools, some schools ask teachers to not do non-instructional duty at all, and some ask them to do it every single day. And as long as they're within 360, they're fine. And some of them are actually over 360, but that's a whole other issue. And so, but right now you have a committee in place that's supposed to be, and I don't even think that this is happening, that's supposed to be deciding as a staff and as a committee what non-instructional duty looks like. And who's to say that they haven't decided to do something that's outside of policy or contract? And we have no way of knowing that because currently those schedules aren't vetted. And so this isn't, so we are, and that's already codified and ratified.
Why not just extend that group? Why are we creating yet another obligation in another group and another committee that even with 5 or 6 people is not going to be representative of the committee of staff within a school? It's not representative of the community.
By changing it from shall to may, you're addressing that because not every school must have that committee. And I'll be honest with you, some principals might not want it. They might not want to do that. Some will, and some have used it successfully. The committee is not, we're not creating this committee, we're asking to create this committee to help schools provide waivers to our contract. That is not what we're interested in. This is legitimately the way I look at it is this is to resolve issues that otherwise take the tone and the morale at a school and you bring it down. Things like, I wasn't joking earlier when I mentioned toilet paper. I've had 3 schools since I've been working here that have had issues getting the staff bathroom filled with toilet paper. And it's as simple as saying, hey, we need toilet paper. It's not, because people forget, people don't remember. If you codify that in a meeting where there's more people there, more voices, you lend it, you say, hey, we have this issue, let's figure this out. You're bringing the school climate together. You're creating an environment.
I'm not contesting the potential value of the committee. I'm contesting the fact that there's no parameters. And I want some safeguards put in place. If we say yes to this, I want some safeguards.
So
Because I don't.
what were some
because as much as we
safeguards
don't
that you would
want,
like?
So I think it needs to say that there needs to be a vetting process, that any decisions or any final things, recommendations they're going to make have to filter up through you and have to filter up through us. I think that's a respectful way to say, we decided to do this, and this is how we're going to address it. And
So it's like a report to the regional, to their staff representative?
Because at the end of the day, if it remains as innocuous as low level as you're presenting the examples, I take no issue at all with building a culture of a community of learners and collaborators. Because I'm all about that with collaborators. What I don't want to do is create autonomous schools and autonomous situations that we then have to go in after the fact and clean up.
Okay.
And to your point, that may exist right now. It will not in the very near future. All the flexibility of the schedules and all this nonsense we're dealing with, I can assure you all of that's going to be reined in, because I don't know how you negotiate. And I don't mean that for my team. I mean it for your team. You are individually.
It's been very difficult.
151 individual schools based off their specific circumstances. That can't be done.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
So that's why we have uniformity. That's why we have consistency.
Yeah, we can agree.
We can agree with that. So what's one sentence, if you don't mind? I mean, I don't know if you're allowed. I mean,
So we've already changed it from shall to may. That was before you walked in. We were okay with that. And so the last sentence, the committee will have no authority to modify or interpret the collective bargaining agreements, school board policy, or replace the grievance procedure.
Any final resolutions.
And any final resolutions will need to be vetted through the regional and
I think-
PEA staff.
So here's what I would say, is I would say your building rep needs to send a copy of whatever the final decision was to you.
Okay,
And the principal needs to send a final copy of whatever the recommendation or decision was to the region.
okay,
Better put designate for you.
yes.
Otherwise,
So the committee,
$1,000.
yeah, the committee will have no authority to modify or interpret the collective bargaining agreements,
Trust me, I'm saving this work.
school board policy, or replace the grievance procedure. Final resolutions,
I would say a copy of the final resolution needs to be sent.
a copy of the final resolution
Submit it to the.
should, will be submitted.
The building rep.
Maybe not final resolution, but resolution.
Copy of the resolution.
They say no. Right.
Copy of the resolutions. Resolution will be submitted by the principal to the regional superintendent,
By the building rep. To
the regional.
Would there be some type of timeline? 'Cause I can see this stretching, a simple issue can stretch because we're adding this sentence.
Yeah, we got it.
And we got it. Yeah. And really, because there may not be, there may not be a time, some things may take longer than others. I just say, once they come to a resolution, I think that's. So a copy of the resolution in parentheses S, because there might be several, will be submitted by the principal to the regional superintendent, and the association representative to the PEA office
Perfect.
for review. So a copy of the resolutions will be submitted by the principal to the regional superintendent and the association building representative to the PEA office for review.
Copy of the proposed resolution.
Yeah, proposed. Good catch.
Okay,
And then Stephanie or the team, we can come up with a timeline for a reasonable response.
okay. All right,
Hear back within 72 hours or 3 working days, then we can consider
yeah,
that kind of thing.
okay. Do we want to add that in? Or
I
just on this?
procedurally will communicate
Perfect.
that. I'll convey that to principal. You can convey it. to
Okay.
her.
Okay. So with that, with the change from shall to may and with the addition of this, are we good?
Yeah, I don't see anything else.
Okay. All right, then I will print.
While you're printing.
So it's comprised, I just want to make sure I'm clear because I want to make sure it's balanced, just like we did with collaborative council. So it's the building rep must be included, correct?
Mhm.
And that's your protection, make sure that contractually they're not overstepping the contract. A balance of up to 5 other employees, which should include paraeducators, ESP, cited and site administrators. Is there no? So that makes 6. Is it 3 and 3? Is it 2, 4 and 2? I'm not too concerned.
Yeah, we just say kind of a balance. We found that 5 is kind of a really good number. Because once you get too bigger
You
than,
don't want to get much.
much bigger than that,
Doesn't
it's
work.
not a working committee really anymore.
Yeah, even.
Yeah,
The other thing too is allow us to track and see if we have consistent issues that are arising. There may be something more regional or district wide that has to be addressed.
okay. All right, I'm gonna print. All right.
So if you get from one school 7 different ways to solve the toilet paper issue, that'll put a flag on your.
You know, I pray that that's the issue we're dealing with, but I really don't. That's what we got to deal with. And okay. My worry is all of a sudden a committee agrees that they're going to road planning time, or that they're not going to do faculty meetings, or they're not going to do, and then the problem is everybody talks and then another school finds out that their committee agreed to something. Why can't we do that? And then it creates issues for both of us.
No, that's a, you know, that's a legitimate concern.
Filtering
That's a
process.
legitimate concern. I get that. I get that. I think the language will evolve through the years. I think you'll find that it's really about those type of school issues. But I agree.
Perfect.
I was gonna mimic what was preceded statute.
For these hours.
This was a long one.
So while you're signing,
Yes.
we're at 6:15. Do you have other articles to
Nope,
continue?
we have everything.
Because I have. a
We have
couple,
everything else.
Like our first meeting, I have some lower hanging articles that we can talk about.
Did we sign off on the ratios?
What's that?
Yes, the CDATs, yeah.
Yeah.
I did before we leave, we'll do y'all's. I did have a question though, before we leave though, about Appendix E and Article 22, because I think some of your proposed language solves some of the issues that we had brought with Appendix E.
Okay.
So I just wanted to make sure that I was right or correct in my thinking.
Six.
22.
And we're going to leave the compensation one for when we have the financial package all together. I know this is a long one.
Just compensation.
So we don't need to really, we can leave 22, I think, until we're ready for the financial stuff.
We're gonna find one. So this one's super easy.
What?
Language on 17.
Whoa.
Well, I guess what we can maybe do is Thursday, if we're really close, we can maybe all make an agreement if we can stay late on Thursday, if we're close to wrapping up the language pieces of this. We can maybe do a little bit later than 7 on Thursday, just if we're close.
3?
Yeah. Yeah, because if we're close and then all we have left is the money pieces. Should go fairly
I
quick.
don't care if we do that. Let's keep it.
Okay, great. Phew.
What copies?
Yeah.
I don't have electronic.
You bring copies for the
She
group?
brought
Yes.
printed copies, yeah.
Oh, thank you.
We're
I'm just waiting
ordering,
until they're.
but we're gonna hold 22 then, right? So another night. Because of compensation.
Which articles?
This our proposed language.
Go with this. Okay. One page.
Yes,
You handed out the
Yes.
17.
yes.
Start talking. Coming around, you should be getting a copy of Teacher Article 17, Transfers and Changes in Assignment. Ready to go ahead and start talking about our language proposals here once we kind of have a green light for signatures and are in a place to focus here.
I have them here, but you can sign them after.
Okay, that's
We
fine.
good?
Yeah.
All right, so with Article 17, look specifically with me at 17.6-2. You can see that this is dealing with what we call involuntary transfers relative to unusual and special circumstances. We have language here that we've stricken where, let me just grab the sentence. Any teacher being transferred under this section may not be placed into an out-of-field assignment or a position for which the teacher is not fully qualified, and the teacher may request written reasons for the transfer. And then it goes on to say, such transfers are effective upon the superintendent's recommendation and require subsequent approval on the next available school board meeting agenda. By process and flow here, what happens is there are times that we need to involuntarily transfer a teacher tomorrow, but we might not have a board date until a few weeks to come. So we're establishing a timeline that we can go ahead and invoke the letter and the transfer, and then it will be presented to the board, but the teacher will physically go ahead and move. That's what that means. And we'll provide them all the due rights with the days appropriate for that move. And then down at the bottom, I want to be clear that I lifted this language out of the para contract. Refusal by the teacher to accept such assignment shall release the board from further obligation to that employee. It's quite directly. Sometimes we transfer them and it doesn't work out, or they refuse to go. They just won't go.
Well, that's actually kind of a past practice.
It has been, and it just codifies it in the teacher language. So that's our presentation for Article 17.
So I did have a question because,
Okay, let me add real quick. The refusal language is also in teacher 17.7.
Okay.
yeah, that's what,
Para 10.5 and
Yeah.
teacher 17.7.
that's what I thought.
Refusal by the teacher to accept such assignment shall release the board from any further obligation of that teacher. And then just.
Well, that was for continuing contract professional service with displacement list. So this
Displacement.
is a slightly different because it's associated with the involuntary transfer.
Copying language.
Yes.
And be reminded, at the end of the day, we would have given them a placement for which they're certified, for which would have been reasonable,
So I do have a question. The added sentence, such transfers are effective upon the superintendent's recommendation and require subsequent approval. If I'm reading that, I might interpret that as that I'm not actually transferring until the board approves it.
No, transfers are effective.
That's the way I
upon when
read
I
it.
give you the letter. That's the superintendent's recommendation, because the letter for involuntary transfer comes from him.
Gotcha.
And then it goes on to saying, I can change the words if you have better words,
Okay.
but the transfer is effective upon the letter, that's superintendent's recommendation, and it requires subsequent, that means the very next board meeting, action,
Available board meeting.
the next.
We only have one a
available.
month.
You should add a period after the superintendent's recommendation.
I think that makes it more
Yes,
clear.
it does.
Because when I read it together, when it says and require, I was like, if I'm reading this, not knowing what the conversation is
Let's
here,
separate them.
I think if we separate it, that's the intent
All right, you got it.
and that makes it clear.
Could you give an example? Like, you don't have to tell me why I'm getting transferred.
Give you an example.
What would be considered an unusual and special circumstances?
Well, I was gonna add, actually, if we could,
Why are we doing that?
17.61. I'd like to add a number 12. For disharmony or adverse impact on the school climate.
I think you're right now within your parameters with unusual circumstances. And I think if you leave that broader, you already can use that language to that effect.
I would agree. I think we've, there's been very little resistance over the years when you've invoked your right to involuntarily transfer.
It doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Clear, I'm not talking about, just so everybody's clear in this room, I'm not talking about disharmony with your administration. I'm talking about two adults who can't get past themselves and continue to be nasty towards each other. And I've had this conversation with Ms. Yocum. I'm transferring both of you. I'm not transferring one. I'm involuntarily transferring both of you. And I'm saying this intentionally so everybody who's listening can hear this. If we have tried to mediate and counsel and done everything we can, and you guys can't get beyond each other, I'm not going to transfer one because then the other one gets a perceived win. I'm transferring both. And we'll do our best to give you some choices, but there's no guarantees in that because this is an issue of professionalism. So if you're saying I can continue with the current parameters, I'm fine with that. I just felt the need to make sure that we're right. You asked a question.
Yeah.
That's why I was trying to give you an example because I had already written it down on my paper. I'm fine with that.
Because my thought went back to when all this stuff with highly qualified certified teachers and our low performing schools hit, and they tried to involuntarily transfer high performing teachers who basically said, you'll have my resignation letter tomorrow if you try to force me to go to X school against my will. Okay.
There's actually a past practice of, we've had several times over the course of time, perhaps a divorce that's occurred or breakup. And that has had to happen where we've had to do that to bring.
And again, I think we do everything we can to mediate, but when these issues persist for years.
So just to, I'm going to back you up on this, just to make sure that we understand, we have a right to caucus and discuss. So what I'm hearing the superintendent say is that it's a practice when these things occur and it meets whatever standard or expectation it hits. That's what I thought, right?
Unusual and special.
He's going to execute. So it's not in the contract. It's not in the contract. So if Peggy Sue can't get along with Billy, I'm not reading it here. I'm not reading it here. So I don't want to hear any. What was that?
Unusual and special circumstances.
And that's how we've been.
Where is
I
it?
did not take any
First
joy in having
sentence,
to do this.
17.6-2.
17.
Okay.
Unusual.
I agree with you.
As for only, it says where such transfers will only be made for one of the following reasons. And there are 12 specific reasons.
No, I'm in 17.6-2 under the superintendent's.
This is the involuntary.
The next one down says superintendent may transfer for
Unusual. Good and sufficient.
Sufficient.
And that's where they.
And that's been the.
Affairs conduct, all kinds of things. That's where the transfer.
Okay. So we're agreeing. Okay, got it.
I can give you all kinds of, those are your unusual and special circumstances.
Gotcha.
Listen,
I was looking at 6.
They don't follow in 1 through 11.
I think I have to respond to either Kevin.
And it's not in one lane.
What's unusual and special about this?
It changes by case.
Yeah, I did.
But that was written for the things that don't fit neatly into.
Correct.
Yes.
a basket.
Hey, and it's not always negative on the teacher. Sometimes we use involuntary. Let's say there's been an offense where they've been out for multiple day suspension and it becomes a big community event or parental or whatever. And the teacher is not comfortable sometimes. They're like, yeah, I would be fine to go to another place.
Yeah.
And so we help them get there.
So we're putting a period after recommendation, and then what's going to be the noun?
Subsequent approval is required on the next available school board meeting agenda.
Okay, so subsequent approval.
Approval is required. I need subsequent.
So approval. Read that again, Laura, sorry.
If we keep subsequent approval is required on the next available school board meeting agenda.
Is required. So subsequent approval is required on the next available school board meeting agenda.
And then no change to the last one.
Okay. All right. So before we caucus, in case.
No, we don't need to caucus.
Are we good? We're good?
We got clarity. Because, we got clarity. He wanted to have a 12, but it's answered on number.
So let me email that to you.
Yes, please.
I still have a question about.
Oh, go ahead, Sandy.
When I read this, I read it, they're gonna have to tell me why they're transferring me. This is I can request it.
If you request, we're gonna tell you.
Yeah.
Well, right now it's that way. Sandy, if you look at the way I'm looking at this, Sandy, it's actually kind of that way anyway. It's just they're kind of cleaning it up.
Yeah, it just was awkward.
The way it reads right now is the teacher may receive written reasons for the transfer if so requested.
Like when they used to tell people you don't fit the mission and vision of our school. When you didn't really know why you were dismissed.
Not a good fit.
No,
Moving another direction.
we're not changing a practice. We're just changing the
Yeah.
verbiage. To
Well,
make it,
and this is,
read.
this is not a principal right. This is a superintendent right.
So here's what I can tell you, and Ms. Yocum can attest to this. There was one recently that I was going to get involved with. I called her and told her I wanted her to meet me at the school because I was going to tell the employee. I don't send them. I'm going to look you in the eye and tell you why I'm transferring. Because it's reached that level. And you need to hear that because you're not going to go to your next school and become disruptive either. It's just, we can't allow this to persist and we get our feelings hurt because, and you use some very good examples. We were dating and we broke up, or I was dating somebody else, we broke up, and now somebody else is dating my ex. And so now we're going to have our, no.
You're welcome.
No, that's exactly what this is.
No, it is.
I won't do that. I'm going to be honest. In my entire history, Stephanie can verify this with my previous union president. I would call him, we'd have a conversation, we'd reach an agreement. He would meet me at the school and I would meet with both candidates and say, I'm moving you. And here's why.
Well, and to verify that, there was a situation at a school where Fred did call me and we might need to go out, but it ended up, I think, working itself out. It resolved itself. But we were both going to go out there and look them in the eye and tell them what the deal was. And so this isn't a principal deciding that they just don't want you anymore. This is a superintendent right, involuntary transfer with sufficient reason.
I'm not questioning his right.
No, but it wouldn't be a principal saying.
You're going to hear the reason. And I'm going to be polite. I'm going to be respectful, but you're going to hear the reason.
Or send it to me.
Okay.
So we already have a TA on 17, so I'll just make sure that this is added into the one document. So are you okay with just TAing this one page and then we'll add it in? Okay.
This is our other.
Appreciate that.
I'm ready to tee up.
Right. Yeah. All right. I like those words, Brian. So such transfers are effective upon the superintendent's recommendation, period. Then we're getting rid of and require subsequent approval
Still nothing prepared to do it next.
is required
Yeah, we're handing them out.
on the next available school board meeting agenda. Okay, so I fixed that, Laura. Laura, I fixed it, so it reads before I print. Such transfers are effective upon the superintendent's recommendation, period. Subsequent approval is required on the next available school board meeting agenda. Okay.
Refusal by the teachers. So.
Yeah, that's that. I didn't change that. I just changed what we had workshopped.
I think it's much clearer. Serves great for both of them.
Yeah.
Okay, you ready for me to tee it up?
Oh, give me
Going ar-
1 second. Sir.
Going
Just-
around should be copies of Paraeducator Article 3, just for the record. We're going to look specifically at 3.7.
Password was created, has been resolved.
That's why.
That's what I was doing.
Has some very fancy network managers. Non-network managers.
Yes.
I remember when we.
And any network managers that are listening right now, if you are not a member of PEA,
We collaboratively.
I'm sorry, I had to throw that out there. Shameless.
We should probably review who was on the network manager task force.
Over the 8 years it existed?
You'll find that it was a collaboration between PEA and management.
Yes. All right, so I think we're good with as this is. We can, oh, thank you. So we'll TA, we're good with getting rid of this language. We're good with that.
All right, so
So-
we're gonna move Are you meaning the task force?
The task force,
Yeah, all right.
yes, getting rid of it, striking through, we're
All
good
right,
with it.
so then while we're getting that one
Right.
picked up,
So hold on, since we have two now to sign real quick, before we get ahead of ourselves and I'm losing. Give me-
I like it when I'm pushing hard. to
I
count
need.
down.
Give it to me.
Where's the other copy of this? Let me take yours.
Absolutely.
I have more. Oh, they're right here. Sorry. Sorry. No, you're good. You're good. Didn't see where the attendance was there.
Put them here in the middle, then she can keep this.
Or when you get a chance, it doesn't have to be now, can you send me an electronic copy of this just so I can hang it?
We look at task force.
The task force one.
Hey, Laura, do you have another one?
It's fine.
We like having that.
We haven't passed.
Does anybody else
Yeah.
need one?
Ryan, I haven't passed that one. Yeah, sorry. I thought he was asking.
Ryan, you should have opened with that one.
Yes.
Hey, I can respect that strategy.
All right, this is
Two
our
sides, got it.
lowest.
That was the task force and the 17.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so what do we got?
Today's it here yet?
I have right here.
I just want to say it's so much more efficient. Yeah, in this way.
Oh, yes.
Oh my gosh, we would have been here. Can you imagine all of us having to TA Article 6?
30 page.
Ridiculous.
Now, hold on, you got some old people in here that still like the paper.
I know. I can't make all of y'all tree huggers in 1 year.
Not when it's important to read. Right.
Okay. God.
That's a good point.
If you could stop the people from sending me go to the gym. the Hearing aid request. Okay.
Are these the same?
Yes. But you're going to do two different directions.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Okay. I'm just waiting for 17. Are you guys signing now? Okay, Jason's got it. Okay.
The pressure. Jason.
I just want to keep everything together.
Yeah.
I saw for a long time. I need a signature stamp.
Yeah.
No.
I can't. Actually, it's good for letters when you're doing a fun letters or graduation. Okay. Are we ready? Have we handed out? All right, you should have before you now, Teacher Article 1, employees represented. And what I would like to do here is kind of contrary. I'd like to start with page 202, and then I will go to 102. Page 2 of 2 is an update relative to just our org charts and position titles. You'll see that we've updated with chief of staff, we've added associate superintendents, regional assistant superintendents, and got rid of director of labor employee relations to just include directors.
Okay.
And then coordinators and secretaries as well. So just updated.
These are
representation.
administrative secretaries
Correct.
like Wendy and Elizabeth and.
So that being said, now I'll go over to 1 of 2. The thing that I want to draw our attention to here is the or and then the strike through or to be employed. Because, you know, when we're talking about employees, we're talking about the representation of a unit of employees, whether under contract, on leave, or employed by the district. We have spent time behind the scenes reviewing PERC certifications. PERC acknowledges folks to be a part of a collective bargaining unit upon the time that they're employed, and at that time, then they're represented. It does not acknowledge representation, you know, prior or before employment has begun. And I can cite for you and read from that PERC engagement that I'm talking about here, because we brought it with us tonight in case you wanted to review it, but we wanted to bring that forward. We figured it was like an update.
Yeah. So a clarifier on page 2. We understand that clerical administrative secretaries means like your Wendy's and your Elizabeths, but this does not mean principal secretaries.
No.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. Because principal secretaries are still listed in the,
Executive.
I think we might want to change that to executive secretaries.
Yeah.
Because administrative secretaries people might think that that's a principal secretary, and that's not true. So clerical executive. So can we strike through administrative and then add executive?
Yeah, because those would then be the secretaries attached to your associates.
Yes.
Or to be, can we change guidance counselor to school counselor? That's a statute change, actually.
Doesn't that require per unit modification?
Yeah, we can't mess with. No, you're good. You're good. I understand the change just holistically, but under the PERC certification, we can't mess with how it's listed in PERC. You're good.
What it was when they got assigned.
Yeah.
And that's been the same since 2014, the last update, and adding the 15.
Yes.
I had a question. I forgot.
Just say non-union clerical.
I think we want to be specific.
Okay.
Because we're not wanting to do that lower level.
So not that we don't agree with the changes. We have a reason we want to hold off on this.
Anticipate this.
Yes.
So walk me through
Go
the
ahead.
anticipation. When you say you anticipated it, why would you anticipate it? What was your anticipation?
Because I thought you'd want to go back and look at PERC rulings and certification on that.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I've tried to be very clear relative to our position.
Yes.
Why? I feel like it's backed up by PERC and what I'm reviewing here.
Sure.
Relative to the rulings that they've made and who it includes and when they're included.
Mhm.
So if you'd like to go back and review that with your counsel or on your own,
Excellent.
feel free.
Perfect. So we will be prepared to discuss this on Thursday though.
Okay.
All right, Laura, next one.
All right. What we got?
All right, let me give you. I've done as much quickly as I can. We got 15.
You're on a roll, Brian.
We can do it. That's our team members.
This may be.
Uh-oh.
Go on.
All right. Going around. Hitting Article 14, professional qualifications and assignments. Wait a minute, copies to go. I know we have 15 minutes, so I'm gonna, y'all teach right to the bell?
That's right, that's right.
Yes. Oh, we do.
Sometime even a few minutes after.
Okay.
We teach them on the way to the bus.
That's right.
All right, so we'll jump in
Wait.
there. Oh, you.
No, I'm just.
Okay, there are no changes on page 1 of 6, neither 2 of 6.
Wait, I'm missing 2 of 6.
Yeah.
Yes, it just printed the odds.
And then to 5.
That's gonna be problematic.
Can I have a committee for a copier, please?
Yes, send me it and I can print it.
But we only have
A
one
proposed
change on
solution, we'll
5,
pass it
Brian.
on to.
What page? You only have odds.
We only have odds. We have 1, 3, 5.
I don't know.
I have 5 of 6. You have 5 of 6?
Yeah, we have 5 of 6.
Memorized.
We just have the odds. We have 1, 3, 5.
All right, my apologies. So
My
we'll
apologies.
let's start on 5 of 6.
Perfect.
It's, let me. All right, so what you're looking at here, you'll first see 1410-2. This is not going to, it needs to connect really to what we wanted to talk about on page 4, but what we're talking about on page 4 is we're talking about the PEC and the professional education competence program. In 1410, it outlines what it's about and the qualifications and responsibilities of that group. And then you move into 1410-2. Mentoring teachers must document completion of enumerated duties and professional development qualifications prior to receiving payment. The supplement amount is listed in Appendix C. And then we just added supplemental salary schedule. So we're using still the same doc that we use all the time. 1410-3, mentoring teachers may mentor up to 6 new teachers, it says at a time. We've struck the words each school year. Because it doesn't connect, it can walk across. I will tell you, I think this is going to provide even more opportunity for teachers to mentor and make more extra funds so long as they meet those criteria, which if we can get those other pages, I can unpack that more for us in a little bit. And then there's new language that follows. This supplement is subject to approval by professional development staff based on successful completion, uploading or approval of the specific minimum number of mentoring tools into the designated online platform. Basically, as I visited with Miss Joe and with Dee Dee over in PD, it was their concern, it was their priority, it was their focus that, if you're going to mentor and provide, services through PEC to these teachers, they have certain amounts of work samples or interventions or strategies that they wanted these mentors to have in the bank. And they have a certain number that that you do per category. And I can show that to you later. But I guess what I'm trying to say is this language, while I know we're talking on another level about supplements with Beth and with Dan, this is not quite that way in that regard, because it's much more prescriptive relative to the PD and what that is. But it does provide an opportunity for teachers, mentors to have more mentees, and where these mentors live, that means more money in their pocket to have more mentees. So that's how that goes. Do we have, are my other pages coming around?
So Laura had sent me one that was completed, and so it looked like on page 4 on 14.9-3.
Yes.
Shall be maintained at the designated online platform.
Yeah, I can pick up there. It was pretty, that again, it was generic and not program specific, so it lives on. What's happening behind the scenes is Learning Zone was very time and program specific relative to a learning PD platform they were using. So that's what that is. And then, as I was saying, now you can look at pages 1 through 3, see that there were no changes. And then 6 of 6. I'm sorry. Can I come?
Who assigns the mentor?
That comes through PD. Dee Dee and her.
The PEC program.
Mhm.
No, I get that, but what I'm saying is, so PD then says this person needs a mentor and then throws it to administration to assign at that school. Or PEC says, no, this person at that school will be.
I believe that's handled through PD, and then they track relative to the match of the mentor and the mentee. First, they have to make sure that the mentor has done all of the requisite pieces to be the mentee. And then once the mentee is assigned, they have to meet a period number of times over a 90, if it was a certain number of days period.
99.
Assigned
Yeah.
so the district.
There's an approved list.
PD has an approved list, and then the principal chooses from people at her school who are on the approved list, right?
Right.
For new
So
hires.
it behooves teachers to be on that list because then they can make money by having up to 6 mentees assigned to them.
So. I gotta play devil's advocate here. What happens if a mentor is not assigned? Let's say it falls through the cracks and administration of the school doesn't assign the mentor to that person.
Do they have to do it like on a rotating basis?
You mean I'm a mentee that needs a mentor and I don't?
You're a mentee, let's say you're a first year probation, you're in the PEC program, the administration, it falls through the cracks, they get told by PD to assign one and they don't.
Quite honestly, we'd probably have to go back into the contract and look at something that was not done and kind of turn the clock back and make sure they get the PD that they need to get us to work.
I don't think PD assigns the mentor. I think the principal assigns the mentor. And PD's
Says they need one.
No, PD says you, Mary Ann, have met the requirements to be an official mentor.
PD is just providing the list of who can be a mentor.
That's how it used to be.
That's how it is.
So I guess to piggyback on that, just fleshing this out, right? Because I mean, I don't see anything personally, right now, I think we're okay with the language, but fleshing out the system behind it. Principal doesn't like me, Stephanie, and I'm a mentor, but he never assigns me a mentee. Is it our mentors given like on a rotating basis? I'm a mentor, and there's mentees available. Principal can't just pass me up because they don't want to use me.
It should, I would say, in a perfect world, it should be on a rotating basis. So everybody has an opportunity to have mentees assigned to them. To be direct and transparent, favorite shouldn't be selected to get all the mentees. Now, obviously, some teachers are better mentors than others and can incubate and train and get people to the next place. But to your point, I wanted to go back to language on 6 of 6.
Okay.
Teacher mentors, it says see teacher article 14, professional quals, and the assignments, it says teachers assigned by the principal supervisor as the designated PEC mentor for new hires. So the principal assigns those. So I need to stand kind of corrected and qualify
It's
that.
Appendix C.
And then I agree with Mary Ann. PD would stand in the gap to say these mentors are qualified and have all of these experiences and are ready to receive mentees. Here's a list of them for the school, and the principal would go from there. But to your point of if you have a new teacher or a probationary that never was in a PEC program and never got a mentor, I would just offer, I don't know that that's something that I would put in contract with, something we would need to work on and know behind the scenes.
That's kind of the point that I'm just getting at.
Because there's issues. We could argue about evaluations that would go sideways. I would argue the point that the dismissal of probationary would go sideways. Multiple things there. So we would have them to talk about.
Put that out there for us to think about.
Are we codifying somewhere in here what the qualifications are to be a mentor? Because I know what you're talking about. It's used to be the pilot program or whatever. It's the same.
Correct.
It's through PD, but I just didn't know if it was in here.
I didn't run copies.
Okay.
But I brought this for background. PEC completion for each new teacher served. A mentor they have to complete a minimum of 4 collaborative assessment logs by the end of the year with the mentee. They have to complete one of each of the following. One of them is how to analyze student learning. The second would be a planning conversation guide. And the third would be an observation tool, that's formerly the POC CSA, formerly the CSA with data collection. And it says here, in addition to the completion of the tools above, teachers in the PEC program also require 99 student contact days of mentoring with their mentor. And Dee Dee tracks those days on her side. And that's ensuring, again, to Kevin and to your point, that there is that, if you're going to get your money, you're going to meet with those people and give them that support that they need.
But people used to do training for people. I want to be a mentor. I used to.
That's what I was trying to get to.
And then when I went through training, then they, I got finalized, and now I'm an official on a list that I am a suitable mentor. So there's two pieces to that. Is what's that process so that everybody knows how I can be a mentor. And then the other thing is, and I think Kevin might have brought this up. So I'm a principal and I have 7 approved mentors at my school. How do we make sure that everybody has a fair and equal shot to being a mentor? Instead of just saying, we're going to just make
take all
Susie
6 of
the
our
official mentor for the school. That's a question. That's part of the questions I have that I don't see in this. And I'm not saying it necessarily all has to be in the contract, the training portion, but it's somewhere along the line. People need to know how they can sign up.
How can they become a mentor?
To become a mentor.
And it's not new language. We're just trying to.
Oh, and I know that.
No.
I was just asking, and Mary Ann
Okay.
followed up on it,
Yeah.
so that it's clear that people know how they can become a mentor. Maybe that can be referred to somewhere. I don't know, but that's just, I was trying to make sure.
To your point, Laura, you're right. This is not new language. When my wife worked in this district, this is a first year teacher in the PEC program. She asked me, aren't I supposed to have a mentor? Now, I was not working in Polk at the time, but when I read the contract, the answer was yes, but she did not, was never assigned a mentor.
And ask for principal, it was too late.
She did, and was told that they didn't have a mentor to give her. So I asked the questions knowing that in the past, and did not have provided one or two.
So with it so close, and I know my team had a few questions to wrap up on this. We'll be ready to talk through this right when we get back on Thursday.
And please follow through with page 6 of 6.
Yes.
Because we did not.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Brian.
On 6 of 6, you'll see there is in the third paragraph, we struck and longevity. I'm not quite sure how that fit previously, but it would just read all supplements are payment for duties performed beyond the regular workday, except the case of in-school suspension monitors, period. And again, now you're looking at Appendix C, which is the supplemental salary schedule. Then I want to go down to the new language at the bottom of the page, teacher mentors. This is the part that we were just talking about. Teachers assigned by the principal or supervisor as the designated PEC mentor for new hires will be paid a total supplement not to exceed $362 per assigned mentee. Do the math times 6. It's pretty lucrative. It's signed per assigned mentee teacher, subject to the successful completion upload review. It's the same language from before. Completion of less than 4 and less than 7 mentoring tools will result in a prorated supplement. So what they're saying is you're not going to have all those meetings and all that piece in there. They're going to prorate it. Again, the impetus is to get your full money, engage with that teacher as mentee. And so that's my closing for tonight. You can review that with your team and we'll pick it up next time.
So just real quick, completion of less than 4 and less than 7. So, because up above it says professional development staff of a minimum of 4, but not to exceed 7.
Correct.
So it says less than 4 and less than 7.
We'll check that language.
So yeah, just because that doesn't make sense to me. Okay.
Completion.
And so before we leave today, okay, if you can check that. So I did want to real quick, I know we're coming up close to 7. but we have all three of our contracts of the grievance procedure, some of the changes that we had provided to you, and board's rights with prescriptions. Are we going to be prepared on your side to talk about that on Thursday? Those two issues. We have the grievance procedure. There's some modifications, I think, to step 3 and step 4. Some of them are small changes. And then the board's rights articles with prescription drugs. I think you guys were getting some legal opinions. But are we going to be prepared to talk about that on Thursday?
I'm hopeful, but Tess hasn't heard a lot from within the state. He's having to rely more on a network outside the state. Very few are willing to touch the topic.
And then just real quick so that we're prepared for Thursday, Appendix E, we had put that across on the 10th of March, and it was with Polk Virtual and bringing in part-time instructors like with the vocational instructors. But on your proposal and compensation for Article 22 on the teacher side, I think.
Give us a date. Oh, sorry.
So Appendix E was given to you guys on March 10th. But your proposal was given on the 31st of March. And so I just wanted to real quick, because I think it might have addressed some of those issues in Appendix E with your proposed language. So on page 4 of 10, on y'all's proposal to 22.
Hang on.
And it's on page 4. 22.7. And it says, so it's the hourly salary schedule. Oh, wait, sorry. No, that was my note. Didn't make a change there. I'm sorry, on page 7 of 10, on 22.17.
It's
Sorry.
After 7.
Alarm.
it's my sugar's a little high. I'm just saying.
Okay. It's okay. So 22.17, teachers on an approved extended contract to provide student instruction beyond their regular contracted workday will be paid at the teacher's regular hourly rate of pay. And so I think that addressed some of our concerns with even, I think, Appendix D, even though we don't have an official proposal for D. Well, this was the proposal, but we didn't get a chance to talk about it on the 31st. And so we decided to hold the compensation article until we have the whole financial piece.
You want to address as many easy topics as possible on Thursday because Brian will not be with us.
That's what I want to disclose. to the group.
Gotcha. Okay.
My son is graduating.
Oh, congratulations.
I came to the superintendent and came to
So
Jason
you want to
early.
give us many fluff topics.
Gotcha. Well, so that's why I'm glad I'm asking this now, because we're not going to officially talk about 22 until we have the whole financial package together, because a lot of.
You and I talk tomorrow afternoon and we can finalize.
Okay. Okay.
I can make sure that
I just didn't want by a matter
Gotcha.
of legality or process with chief negotiator that you guys could continue.
Okay.
Is that correct?
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
Okay. And then so I think that addressed some of it because it was their teacher's regular hourly rate of pay. And then also in 2218, the employee's regular hourly rate of pay for conferences instead of the 1809. So that might address most of what we were trying to get at with E. So I just wanted to clarify that you guys are good with that. And I think that was it for that. Okay. The rest of it we can deal with. And then Mr. Hyde, we can talk tomorrow at our school visit. Are you going to be there a little bit early? I don't know. We can talk after we're done live here. Okay. So we have for Thursday.
Yeah, I'll get there early.
Okay.
I have to leave right on time.
Okay. Okay. So we have, we will talk about Article 14 that you just brought on Thursday. Have Article 1 for Thursday that you guys just brought. We have the grievance procedures for all 3 contracts that we've already presented to you guys. The board's rights that hopefully Wes has some answers for you all.
Yeah.
And then I think that's it for Thursday, unless you guys have others that you're bringing.
So we are going to adjust 22.17?
No, I was just clarifying that's really the hourly rate of pay, because I think that addresses some of the issues that we had presented to you guys with Appendix E. And so that might have worked some of that out. Okay. All right. Well, this concludes negotiations for today. We will meet back here at the PEA office on Thursday, May 5th at 3:00.